All right, good afternoon, everybody. We were waiting on a few more people, but we're just going to get started and they'll catch up when they get here. So thank you, everybody, for coming to the Surface Water Workshop today. My name is Rhonda Clark-Gauthier, and I'm the Executive Director of the Mighty Peace Watershed Alliance. Just a couple of housekeeping type things. Obviously, washrooms are over there. Coffee and cookies are over there. If you are wandering around aimlessly, you should have a mask on. But if you're eating cookies and drinking coffee, you're relatively safe. It's the rules of the day, okay? On your table, there's a stack of sticky notepads. And so throughout the afternoon, if you come up with questions, thoughts, ideas, suggestions, whatever the case may be, fill out one and stick it on one of the boards to the side, please. If you have questions at the end of the day, we're going to have a panel discussion. And if you have some questions that you'd like to bring forward to the panel at that time, you can certainly put them on the sticky notepad. If you don't want to ask the question and you want one of us to do so, then again, just stick it on here and just put it for panel, okay? Please help yourself to any of the items that are on the table when you first came in. If the pens don't work, it's because they've been in isolation for 2.5 years. And so we noticed that a number of them have dried out. So if you got a pen and you go, well, this doesn't work, just toss it and try another, and you might have to go through a few. But we're sorry about that. We don't want to just assume they don't work. And otherwise, start the day off by introducing a few of the people from the Mighty Peace Watershed Alliance who are here today. As I said, my name is Rhonda, and I'm the Executive Director. Adam Norris is my colleague. He's the Watershed Coordinator. And Rick Keeler is from Berwyn area. He's a public member at large on the board and is currently the chair. Bob Cameron is the past chair of the board and is from the DeBolt area. Sits in the Conservation Environment seat. Elaine Garrow is representing rural municipalities on the board. I think that's everybody who's here today. If you are not a member of the Mighty Peace Watershed Alliance and would like to get your name on the list, please, there's a membership brochure over there that you can fill out and hand to me. All right. So for those who don't know what the Mighty Peace Watershed Alliance is, we were established in 2011 as the Watershed Planning and Advisory Council for the Peace and Slave River watersheds. We were established in 2011 after Initiators Group got together and decided, a group of stakeholders decided that there needs to be work done to protect our water quality and quantity and looking at the things that we do on the landscape that affects that. So our mandate falls under the Government of Alberta's Water for Life strategy, making sure there's safe, secure drinking water, healthy aquatic ecosystems, and reliable quality of water for economic sustainability. So we have a broad base of work that we're trying to do with only 2 staff at the moment. So we try to do projects and things throughout the piece so that we can either demo or help people work through processing and planning and try to do some good work across the watershed. Our watershed covers 30% of the province of Alberta, so Grand Cache through to the lower Peace up into the Peace Athabasca Delta. So just a little space in the province we call Alberta, and we only deal with the water once it comes across that really nice line there between BC and Alberta. So it's whatever comes across the line is what we deal with, and hopefully once it goes out the other side of Alberta, it's still in good shape, good quality, good quantity. So we did a State of the Watershed report back in 2015. It's on our website, or if you ask us, we can send you a copy. That was our first really big piece of work. We did a number of projects up till then to gather the information we needed. We had hoped that in 10 years' time, 5 years' time maybe, that we could do an update. But there's so much work. There's just so much work. So we are not ready to do a second State of the Watershed. But we're doing projects and work and initiatives along the way that help put us into better stead. So the next piece of work that we did was an integrated watershed management plan. Again, that's on our website, or we can send you a copy. And in that document, it talks about 4 issues of concern that the stakeholders across the piece identified for us as being something they really wanted to talk about. So non-saline groundwater, the Peace River flow regime, water availability in quality and quantity away from the main stem. So everybody looks at the Peace watershed and says, the Peace River is a huge river, there's lots of water, you guys have nothing to worry about. Well, that might be true if everybody lived on the river, and we do not. So there's many, many tributaries that are in trouble that do need some work to happen around them. And I forgot the last one, Adam. I said that one. Oh, wetlands and wetland loss. Oh, goodness. Sorry, it's been a long day already. Wetlands and wetlands loss. This one is key for our area because in this watershed, 28% of the land base is in fact wetlands. There's always education purposes and stuff that we try to talk about what a wetland is and how they're important and how they regenerate and help us with water, and there'll be some conversations today about that. I see people shaking their pens. I'm really sorry. Just go grab another one if it doesn't work. So wetlands and wetland loss is another huge area of concern for us. So those are the 4 areas that our strategic plan and our IWMP, we work towards those initiatives, and all the projects that we do, everything that we do, it's looking at those 4 areas. So one of the things that has come to mind, or has come foremost in our mind in the last few years, living in the Peace, we know, oh, this year it's a flood year. Oh, this year it's a drought year. Oh, this year it's flood and drought, or drought and flood, or whatever case you want to do. So in the last couple of years, we continue to see those kinds of issues. When we have a flood year, everybody thinks they know where the water's got to go. And so they're going to, dig ditches or do whatever they have to do to get the water immediately off their land. Or a lot of times, people throughout industry or people who own any piece of land are saying, well, I got to protect this. Okay, well, careful. Think about your neighbors upstream and downstream, or uphill and downhill. Whatever you do on the uphill side will definitely affect everybody on the downhill side. So if you make the water go farther, faster, straighter off of your land, chances are you've just washed out your neighbor, cleared out every gravel road in the middle, cleaned out culverts, taken out ditches, and any other infrastructure that might be in the way. Both in 2018 and 2020, huge numbers were used to try and fix some of those costs. And some of those things still haven't been addressed because nobody has all that kind of money to fix it, right? So on the flip side, this past year was drought for many of us. And when I speak about water in those terms, as an agriculture producer myself, I can tell you I have experienced both, as well as everybody else in the Peace Country. So I understand sometimes we wish the water would move faster, but on the other hand, when we get a drought year like this past year, you're thinking, I wish there was a way that we could have saved some of that, or had some of that to keep the resources in place to rejuvenate the watershed. So again, we'll talk a bit about that today. Ag producers, municipal governments, and general public have talked about the issue of surface water and the destruction of infrastructure and land. Topsoil loss is a huge, huge problem, and we need to be cautious of that. There's many elements to consider when dealing with surface water. First and foremost is to consider the bigger picture. What is happening upstream or up in the highlands that might have a minor or a major effect that is going to affect the downstream or downland, the lowlands. Trying to fix surface water concerns by only looking at an immediate area or an immediate problem tends to produce insufficient results, and for that location and for those around them. The bigger picture that we would like to see is to work towards a surface water management plan. That can assess the larger scope and then work towards mitigating the destruction of high flows or the devastation when the low levels occur. Working towards an organized plan that recognizes the concerns of all producers and infrastructure in that area will better serve all involved. No one wants to be that person at the end of the line who has to deal with the massive amounts of water that have come rushing towards them. So if you had a surface water management plan, or we work towards that, and we can offer some services in helping you work towards some of those things, looks at beneficial management practices and municipal policies that can help coordinate and manage a plan. The costs for everyone are just too great for us to ignore this situation. Water needs places to flow and places to rest. Bigger, deeper, straighter ditches are not the answer. Moving the water faster only allows more destruction. And then on a dry year, there are few reserves on the landscape because the water was pushed off so very fast. Meandering waterways and wetlands will help us with this, taking care of our riparian areas. Having a few trees that like to just hang out is a good thing. Today we want to present some information around beneficial management practices, some ideas, some economics, and have a discussion regarding opportunities, the need for more information, and possible partners to encourage surface water management planning. Our hope today is, we're really happy that you've come out in person to join with us, is to have some good conversation about what some steps that you'd like to see or that we can help you move forward with. So our first speaker today is trees, forest, assets, and liabilities to your municipality, Tozo Bozic. Tozo, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you, Robert and Alan, for the invite. Last time I became the PCO was 2019. As a part of the employee of Alberta Agriculture and Forestry, and my last day with the government. My last day with the government of Alberta was the day when the COVID shut down the entire world. And I started my own business. I do have one company, legally registered, it's called ATTS Group, and the second one is Yard Whispers. I have over probably 27 years of anything dealing with the trees and forestry. I work on the renewable energy, business investment, and a few other things you're going to get from me. But before I go, many of you, I know you, I met you one way or another, and glad to see you back after 2 years of COVID that I haven't seen for a while. So I want to ask you before I start my presentation, how many of you guys work for the municipality? Or representing municipality? Yes, Elaine. Okay. Any municipality? Okay. How many of you are farmers? Oh, excellent. Anybody work for insurance? Insurance company? Okay, Elaine, you don't like them, but they are very important. And how many of you are in banking? Okay, the reason I'm asking what I'm going to talk about it is those are two that you might not like it. It's called liabilities. Those are one that are deciding lots of things and come to the, especially with the trees in many ways. So I will go, my name of the company actually I gave after the first names of my children and my wife and myself. And I always use this phrase all the time since I've been literally from a university. There is a decision, and then there is an informed decision. Many of us through my career, I probably gave 2,700 public speaking events. If you Google my name, you're going to find me all over the place. Okay? I wrote lots of things, and I met so many business people through my career. Probably 10,000 farmers in Alberta. There's no town of 500 that I haven't been. I travel lots, I met lots of people. And I always come to the business, I always ask people, how did you make that decision? Doesn't matter if you're a farm level or you're a big CEO of the company. And people said, well, from my gut. I said, there is no such a thing from your gut to make decision. Your gut decision is based on 30 years experience. and you think you make that decision. Lots of people really do make a decision without really being informed. And my always job is to try to people make informed decisions. Doesn't matter if it's a good or bad and ugly decision. Have you done your homework? And that's what my business is about. We have a 3-section, forestry, environmental, and business side. I try to get my kids, my daughter is hopefully finished within 6 months or a year as a HR, and try to tell her not to work for anybody and start her own business and going through work for your father. My son is a mathematician. Actually had an interview with the Stats Canada, and try to involve with this. Since I left the government, and I said to everybody, I loved what I did for 20 years with the government of Alberta. I'm proud. They treated me very well. I have 0 regrets. I enjoyed, but moved on in life. Since I started running my own business, I said, I got so many offers for a job, and I said, thank you very much. I want to run on my own. And one of the main reasons is my kids, both of them. On environmental service, I want to just give you a little bit heads up. There is one project that I've been working, investment around $180 million in this region. And I cannot tell you anything else. Probably within a couple of months, you might know more about it. But right now, I cannot say anything. And I visited 47 out of 63 landfills. I always said, if you want to see who we are as a society, just for once, go to see the landfill. And then you're going to shake your head, what the heck we are throwing. So this is what it is. On my forestry side, which is probably most people knows me about it, one thing since I became private consultant, and I've been hired more and more frequently, and I personally don't like it, it's the first one I emphasize, forensic tree expert. I've been approached by the lawyers and insurance company, and that's why I was asking you, who is anybody from insurance company? More and more cases I'm getting that people go to the court. In many cases, we became much more like Americans. Anything you don't like it, you go to court. And I've been in some of the cases that is really, most of the so far cases is somebody sprayed and killed the trees. That's huge amount of cases, that, not huge, but large majority. Now I got to some of the cases that somebody cleared my trees and flooded my entire farm, but not just one farm, dozens of farms. Do I have a case to sue them? It's scary thought, folks. It's truly scary thought. But I have no doubt that within a couple of years, we will have more and more cases like that. Even though it's your own farm, you can do whatever you want. Or your land. No, it doesn't need to be a farm. And if it starts affecting me, and my insurance is going to say, where'd you get this from? And then they hire me and say, hey, you are a tree guy. And I can probably back up by the science in some of the cases. That's why they hire me, insurance and adjusters and lawyers. So, and I told Amy last night that, Amy, I don't like that. I really don't want to base my business on that, but in some cases it's real. And they will shape lots of things. Water and trees, Rhonda and Adam did an amazing job, and why is important, and I can re-emphasize what it is. I picked the one, absorb the chemicals. I think the last time I checked, we put 570,000 tons of the herbicides and pesticides in our agriculture every year. Plus runoff. That's coming from the roads, coming from the forest clearing, land clearing, name it. Huge amount of that end up in our watershed. And if you guys look at how they traced the COVID, they traced in the water in the city of Edmonton to see how many cases. Amy is working over there to track how much pollution is going on. The beauty of the trees is this, they can capture. Our aspen tree can capture probably 75 to 80% of the bad things that won't end up in the water. Incredible ability to do that. And the moment, I told you guys, I met so many farmers, I asked farmers, how was this area in 1947, 1962, when you were 7 years old boy or whatever. They said to me, Tosha, and I was looking in one area in Athabasca, Trent, not far away, over there, and it was like a little depression. And I said, what the heck is that? He said to me, Tosha, 1947 was a creek. My father and I was fishing, and now it's a pasture. No trace of water whatsoever. And every farmer that I talked with, I ask always about water. We are very blessed with oil and gas, but we are very scared to come to the water in lots of parts of Alberta. And I asked them, what happened with the trees? He said, the moment you remove the trees, the water is gone. Period. And we sometimes good, as Rhonda said, sometimes bad, depending what side you are. But this is the beauty of the trees. You remove the trees, you're going to have an issue with water. Now, this graph, the beauty of the trees in the forest is not just slow down when it's a heavy rain, but keep the snow, keep the runoff. The moment, when you have a guy's heavy rain, open field, and I know in the city of Edmonton, when lots of urban municipality hired me, the moment water dropped down on the road or on the pasture, within 2 minutes, they created that top layer, and water doesn't penetrate anymore further down, and it just runs off. On the parking lots, it's instant runoff. On the open field, usually if you have a heavy rain, usually after 2 minutes, it's sealed, and then it's run off. With the trees, that same amount of water, 80% is absorbed by the crown and the leaves and slowly go down. And not just that, it keeps for a long period of time. Does not provide runoff. And that's one of the things that tree does. And on top of that, they also recharge our underground water. Anybody here, in the springtime, come here in April or May, all of the fields, no snow. You walk in the forest, you're going to find the snow. And you have further up to the mountains. I was actually Schweitzer National Provincial Park. The amount of in Jasper, the amount of trees killed by the mountain pine beetle, it's humongous. Do you know, folks? When I was, as an immigrant, I learned lots about Canadian Alberta history, and I was puzzled what happened in 1930s. Why do we have a drought? And it was a practice, certain practice that we did, plowing, everything. But actually, the reality was, I looked from the forestry. We had a horrendous forest fire in 1800 and early 1900 that wiped out most of the forest all the way from New Mexico to Alaska. And we think that now we have a big fires. That fires in 1800, we are talking about one fire, 5 million acres, which right now we don't have it. So the old forest was gone. Young forest come back. After fire, forest come back. But it's that young forest that couldn't keep the snow and create their own weather that was really changed the weather in 30s. And that was the trigger. 2002 drought, we had a dry year in 2002 than 1930s. People don't forget that. And that's what I worried now, that what's going to happen with the mountain pine beetle and the forest fire. They'll come, they wiped out the forest. 95% of the forest in Canada is coming from the forest fire. Forest fire is a good thing and a bad thing. It gives the birth to the new forest. When that forest is burned, you will see more extreme of the flooding. I asked that minister of 2009 about mountain pine beetle. Is our dams, Brazeau, Abraham Lake, Old Man River, are they able to handle the amount of water that you might get once those trees are gone? And they paused for a moment. I said, ask your engineers about it. Because you will have a peak of the water like crazy, and then nothing. And that is danger. So what is the driver in your watershed? Climate, do you like or not? Fire, do you like or not? Flood, agriculture, shape your watershed one way or another. Liabilities arise from those four. And trees might be some solution. So in 2019, many of the counselors probably seen some of this slide I'm going to show you right now. Aspen, the most widely distributed species in the world, all the way from Russia, Europe, all the way through Canada, all the way to Mexico. And it's incredible. Many of you, if you're a farmer, you don't like aspen because it's like a weed. You try to kill them so many different ways, and it's still popping up. The reason for that is the roots. Roots of the aspen trees, I always say to people, how tall is the tree multiplied, let's say 60 feet, multiplied by 2, that's how far roots is going to go, guarantee you. 120 feet. So if I'm a tree, aspen tree, 120 feet around the circle is my roots. One of the biggest living organisms in one aspen forest in Utah, 47 acres occupying. And it's protected, actually, matter of fact. But what scares me, since I was coming to Peace every year. Around the 2002 was drought, and 2009 it was wet year, but then again drought. I see lots of your aspen tree dying, especially this side of the hill, okay? And I said, where the heck is this coming from? When you see old aspen dying, that's normal. But when I see 30 years old aspen dying, that's something not normal. And dying en masse in this piece, this area. I said, something is going on. So the friend who works for the Canadian Forest Service, they kept, and I helped that study in 2004. He retired, Ted Hogg. They started in Saskatchewan and say, why aspen start dying? Putting the science. So this is what they find out. On the left side is 2003. And it's dense, nice forest full of leaves and everything else, performing all of the functions. Just 5 years later, you end up like this. It's like, okay, this is unusual. And then later, 4 years, not even that stands. And all of this is on the ground. You guys, after the Chuck Lake fire, do not have any illusion that aspen forest is not going to burn. It will burn. Coniferous, much faster, but aspen forest is going to burn and create big, massive fires. So in relatively speaking, 9 years, you go from here to this. Yesterday I was driving, and it's identical photo. I drive those highways, guys, every year here I was coming. And you see that forest over and over. And many of the forest was like this, and up like here. Okay, if it's 8 years old aspen, that's fine. But when I see 30 years old aspen, that something is wrong. It's like 30 years old young human being versus 80 years old. It's just health. So I said, okay, what the heck is killing? I have insects. I have diseases. I have rots. Again, that's a disease. And I said, okay, and then a stress and create mortality and killing the trees. As a forest and an arborist, every year I got probably between 200 and 1,000 emails and phone calls, mostly from counties, and the private people ask me what's wrong with my tree. And every year I learn what's killing the trees. So this is a combination of how you kill the tree. So my folks in Canadian Forest said, okay, they dug up the data about climate, and it's called Climate Moisture Index. This is a very typical for Alberta. They dig up the data from 1950 to 2000. When it's red, you have a deficiency, moisture deficiencies. When it's blue, it's wet. And this is the picture on average. And this is a Peace River. You have a roughly always 10% deficiency in the moisture overall. Okay? So what they did next, they said, okay, in 2001, they pick up the data and said, okay, Peace River, guys, you're almost drowning. In 2001, southern Alberta start experiencing the horror. 2002, when real drought hit, you guys are not bad. Around the Peace River, you guys get more deficiency. I think this is a Fairview, I think, somewhere. But it's not bad compared to the Alberta, okay? Then in 2003, again, portion of the Peace is dry, portion wet. Southern Alberta is not bad. 2004, 2005, you guys were drowning, one way or another. 2006, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay? In 10, you guys got worse than almost southern Alberta. 11, again, you're drowning. And that's what Rhonda is saying. We got 1 year drought, 1 year too dry. What the heck we do? 2012, okay, dry. 13. So, but what they find out in 2011, and they compare to the 30 years average, 61 to 1990, 2012, you have on 61. Overall, average 13, 14, 15, 16. This is your average in 5 years compared to the left. And one of the things, remember I told you about aspen, they're really tough species. But what happened when you go, especially in April, March, April, May, when you go from minus 40 to plus 15 and drop down, the only way you kill aspen, and any tree, matter of fact, I always said you kill the tree, kill the roots. And aspen is a beast to kill. It's almost impossible to kill. But when you see the young trees start killing, so therefore it's affecting the moisture in the soil. And this picture is just showing the moisture index. But what is even more telling me, your soil moisture levels, which is way more important to you guys, especially in the farming. That you guys over this period of time, you have a quite deficiency in the soil moisture, not just the above moisture, but the soil moisture. And that's what most likely, guys, you experience now seeing the aspen dying. This is the cause of your trees most likely to die. And that's why I was looking and said, how is it possible 30 years old aspen dead? I've seen so many trees in my life, but that then you figure out that's why. This is how these guys look like from the air. And this all were supposed to be green, not dead sticks. Now the question is, of this mortality, number one, what the heck, as my dear farmer Ed, who is in Eaglesham, told me, said, Tosha, what the heck we're going to do with the dead trees? What options do I have? I know the benefits of having the trees on my field, on my yield, but what do I do with the dead sticks? And on top of that, because they're dead, they don't capture anymore, they don't perform the functions regarding the water. They're dead. Because one aspen tree in the summertime can take between 80 or 400 liters a day. One single tree can go through the roots, go through the leaves, and even transport it in the air. One tree, let's say 100 liters, half barrel. And on average, you have probably, let's say 1,200 trees per acre. 1,200 times 100. It's 1.2 million liters a day, 1 acre. Now you kill that, they cannot do that. What are the consequences? How much is it going to impact? Once you get trees killed, here's the other one comes in. My friend Grant dealt with the Chuck Lake fire. And it's not nice and not pretty. Now, this is the news. You can see news all over. What is interesting, when I came to Alberta in 2000, I can't remember a single county in the outside of the green zone that they have a forest fire. And I remember talking to some of the councillors, because I've seen every chamber in Alberta on the municipal government, and I told them, you're going to get a fire. Oh, Tosha, no way, we don't have a fire. The worst one was the Strathcona County. I was in the council, I said, guys, you're going to get fire. Oh, Tosha, enough of you in a fire. 2 weeks later, they got the northeast parts of the Strathcona got a fire. They firefighters were not even equipped to fight forest fire. They are equipped to fight house fire. And eventually they called the province. Province came in, put it out. What province does, send a $10 million bill. And the county said, holy macro, Tosha, $10 million bucks, plus the loss of the insurance and everything else. Strathcona County was the first county in Alberta to do the fire smart. from all of it. And then the fire started in Sturgeon County, Ponoka County, Lacombe, Lamont, Barhead, your area start having the fire. And now it became, this is last year, I think. Yeah, I pick up to 2021. All of them. And the prairie fire. Funny thing about prairie, if you have a sheltables, that's one of the best ways to stop the prairie fire. Prairie fire burns 4 times heat intensity than the forest fire. And when you have 120 kilometers per hour and the beast is coming to you, one of the best ways is actually to have a windbreak and sheltables to stop, to slow down the fire, that your firefighters come and can do the job. And it's happening. Now, the price on that, well, that's what gets scary. Fire hazard, all of you, some of you guys in the county start getting, you have a hamlets. I did actually a project with Grand Cache that used to be a separate town. Now it's a part of the Greenview County. And all of them is where the people live. Lots of acreages with people, lots of money that pay your taxes very well, high taxes. Most of their houses are not in the open prairie. And most of the forest around those houses are old. So the forest fire that you're going to have in your small communities is more and more. Here's the thing about fire. Everything about news. This is all our news. Fire, fire, fire. The reality is, and it's done by the Fraser Institute, very well done. The last biggest forest fire, it was not here mentioned for whatever reason, it's called Richardson was in later on. It was a 4 million acres fire in 1950. Okay, when you look in the history of the fire, generally speaking, well, this was 1981 in the Swan Hills. The smaller, this is Swan Lake, Slave Lake, and this is Fort McMurray. Overall, our fire and the size of the fire are way smaller compared to the previous one. But where the fire is happening is totally different story. And the previous one lost 4 million acres, not a single house lost. Who cares? Lose the Fort McMurray, thanks God we haven't. Or Slave Lake, that's a different story. If you look in the United States, it's billions and billions of dollars that now insurance company said, I don't want to give you any more insurance. I don't care. You're not going to get insurance. You build house in this forest, you don't have insurance. Have a nice day. And are you going to do that? That's a question. So the consequences of the forest fire on the watershed, on your water, in the first year, will increase the runoff. No doubt about that. Because there's not enough trees to capture. Here is when it's a rainfall, you guys experienced what happened in BC in the flood. Of course, you're going to tell me, Setosha, their dam should have been updated and on and on. Well, they have those we call water rivers. They had them way before, every year almost. The dam didn't burst. The flood didn't happen in Lower Mainland. And the reason why it happened, it was the fire in May wiped out the forest, and that water river flow and suddenly dump. Forest couldn't capture because it was dead and ash, and basically all of that water went down. Our dam couldn't handle that. That's one of the reasons. It's always connected. This is what 60% of precipitation is captured. You take that out, you have right away 60% more of the water running down. Okay? And the higher cost of the water treatment plant, etc. So here is what happened in the BC. Fire, it was a forest that intercepting all of those that we call water rivers coming from the Pacific Ocean, year after year after year. Forest fire last year wiped out huge amount of BC of the forest. So you went from 60 to, in BC, probably 70 or 80% captured by the forest to nothing. So what happened during the fire? When the fire burns, they create literally like a 1 or 2 centimeters layer that became like a glaze. It's almost like ice. And when you have that rain going on that little water-repellent soil, they call, it's literally rushed down. Nothing stops. Yes, did BC should have upgraded their water dam? Absolutely. But those water dams performing the functions for 60 years. It wasn't until the fire came in and say, hey, you're going to now collapse. And that's one of the things what happened. In your case, if you have a fire by the Mount Pine Beetle or some other area or steep slopes here, you will have a water rushing down. After the fire, as Rhonda said, you have a flood. That year, who knows what. I don't know where is this one. This is in Peace River. This is in the Manning somewhere crossing that was happened. Same thing in Peace River. Calgary and the High River, rainfall warning for you guys. So you are familiar with the flood. I always, when people send me the problem with the trees, say, Tosha, what killed my trees? Or what is killing my trees? I always define the people one very important things. There is a symptoms and there is a cause. Most of us jumping into the symptoms. I said, no, that's just symptoms. The cause is something else. And the same thing with this flood. What is the cause? I always said to people, the third thing that is affecting is a land conversion, which in these parts of the world is still occurring. Less in the central Alberta, more happened here. You remove the trees, you have increased the wind speed. You have increased the water runoff. You have an increase of the snow accumulation in the ditches. Even I was driving on the Saddle Hills, and I couldn't stop because the trucker was behind me. I couldn't stop. It was ditch right away, 4 feet full of totally frozen. Okay? Now, and truly, guys, I talked to many farmers here, said, Tosha, we really see the changes in the weather. The wind became stronger because I said, hey, you clear the forest, guess what? Once it starts rolling, it's going to roll. Nothing stops them. But also not just, but also moisture. So Americans, I love that. Every Wednesday I'm in one of the webinars when I can make it with the United States. Canadians, former Prime Minister of Canada, Harper, shut down only research station come to the trees in Indian Head. For 110 years we have that program, he came and shut down. No more research on that. No more trees. We have right now in Canada, we have a zero research come to the private owned forestry. Nothing, zilch. Americans, on the other hand, Trump put $5 billion just for agroforestry. Biden put now $25 billion for agroforestry. They call it regenerative agriculture. Okay, whatever, they name it. So this was way done by my friend, and Americans, they do all incredible research. So what they've done, this is in Dakota, and my friend Craig Strange was taking picture. They put the shelter belt, they put the prevailing wind, and they scoop all of this snow and measure how much snow is captured. And on top of that, they said we're going to go with a tighter spacing, narrower spacing, and different spacing to affect how much snow we're going to capture. To tell the people, because this project is paid by their Department of Transportation. Because there's huge snow accumulations happen in the highways, people lose their life, sue the government as usual in America, and it's damaged the infrastructure, snow, and then water follow. So they pay this agroforestry in North Dakota guys of natural resources to do the study. And I have a whole presentation just on that alone. And what they find out, they said anywhere heights more than 20 feet, you're going to capture, anywhere heights of the 10 feet, you're going to have a snow. And the biggest one is 80 tons of snow that capture. Instead of end up on the road or on the ditches or on the culvert, stay on the field, keep in the moisture, and doesn't damage the structure. Now, also I was part of this study in 2018. It was all of the North America Great Plains project. They always question, I'm a farmer at Tosha, I hate the trees, my trees over there next to the trees are losing the yield, you're losing the crop, too much moisture. And it was 1980s and 1990s they did a study how much that sheltables and windbreaks on field really contribute to your yield. And I was, again, myself and the other guy from Canada, this is in Kansas. And they basically, this is a shelterbolt, and what they've done, they have with a combine, and with a state-of-the-art combine, you measure the yield instantly. And how far in distance we're gonna go. Anywhere you see the green, you have an increase of the yield between the, in average was 16% for the soybean, and wheat was 10%. When you look at all of the compensation and the cost of the windbreaks, and they crunch the numbers to the, you can find this study to the really penny, it's always increased. You keep the trees on your field, it will increase your yield on average 10 to 16%. Now, some of the farmers is going to tell me, Tosha, I hate the trees, it's not convenient. My answer to this, maybe you're not going to like it, guys, but probably 15 years from now, you're going to be replaced by the computer. You're going to sit in your basement and tell the tractor where to go while you're monitoring that. And those things happen. So convenience, it really doesn't play the role anymore. But, and again, Ontario did the same thing, and how far distance and how much yield is increasing. Okay. Now, with those windbreaks and shelterbelts, this is, again, I was with the Lethbridge folks, and in that one flood, county has to dash out, I think, $27 million just on the roads and culverts and everything else. Guys, in your counties, for all of you, I was looking at your budget for each of the county because it's a public document. Your public works in the roads are between 40 to 62% of your budget. And I want to ask you guys, where really does your money go? Why you're spending so much money on that? And what's the cause? How much of money that goes here? So this is basically what happened. Open field, snow end up in ditches, block the ditches, eventually water wash out the road, end up in the farm. Okay? You have a snow here, didn't go there, and much more to drain, doesn't overflow. You remove the trees, but again, this is a Lethbridge. Lamont County, last 3 years they were pounded by the flooding. And they said, Tosha, we can exactly pinpoint where the oil is washed out. 3 years ago, farmers clear the trees, wash out. 2 years ago, farmer clears the tree, wash out. There is a cost. There is a real cost. Now, this guy got flooded, and the other guys got flooded. And they have to go for insurance. And insurance said, why'd you get flooded? Well, it was over there. Like any insurance, do the investigation. And eventually, somebody said, well, landowner cleared the trees. And the insurance said, before that you never got flooded. I said, yeah, no. And the insurance paused for a moment and say, hold on, buddy. To whom we are going to go after now? And I'm going to be in the county of Lamont on March 9 and talk about that. And not just that, cost of there. I asked them, I said, guys, where is your infrastructure cost? He said, that 3 years went through the roof. Okay? So this is the real cost, folks. You remove the trees. This is my friend, Norm Boulay, who retired. Love him dearly. I'm going to miss him dearly as Ag Fieldman. This is in Falair. And he said, Tosha, here's a typical ice jam. The snow was going from the farmer field, end up in ditch, blocked, froze, wash out, the culvert is gone. And somebody has to pay for it. Somebody has to fix it. And you, Elaine, as a counselor, you have to approve that budget. Yeah? And again, go back to the cause. Go figure out what's the cause. Okay? So there is a real cause to it that you guys, as the ratepayers, has to pay. Now, here is what scares me when I was looking. I have a lots of folks who tells me, oh, Tosha, climate change is a BS. I don't believe. I said, I don't care do you believe or not, buddy. You're paying it. What is your belief? Psh, I don't care. But you're paying it. And Federation of Municipalities that hired Insurance Bureau of Canada. And they said, as a result of the changing, you have to increase the cost of your insurance by $5.7 billion. That was in 2017, before the BC horror of the fire and the flood. Okay, now, this morning, I figured out what happened in Alberta. I said, how much is in Alberta we are paying? Well, from 2010 to 2016, $9 billion of the government money out. To give you perspective, Alberta government budget is $50 billion. And just on disaster, we said, okay, we're going to spend. And federal government comes in. But here is what this Alberta municipality made the settlement on the hook for 10% disaster. In March 2021, our minister, Rick McQuire, or whatever last name, I forgot the guy's name, he said, Alberta government anymore cannot provide you with relief. You counties have to dash out 10 or more %, and you know, Ellie. Yes. Then individually, you guys, some get flooded, that the neighbor cleared the forest, and your tractors and houses and everything else to their farm is what, $5-10 million. Farm yard is what, $5 million minimum, plus minus, right? Government said, we're going to give you $500,000 and have a nice day. Insurance is going to say, okay, no problem, but we're going to find the cause. Why you're asking for more? Otherwise, they might say, no, we're not going to give you insurance. And you councilors really pay attention to this 10%. Anywhere you guys got the fire and flooding is, depending, 10, 15, 20, $30 million. Do you count on 10% disaster? And this is the where I always said, this is the driver. As I said, in California, PGA, their utility company that was responsible for the fire and death of so many people, is basically bankrupt. No insurance is going to give them. And in special states, no way I'm going to insure you. You live in a forest or a fire, good luck. Have a nice day, buddy. You're on your own. And do not be surprised that this is going to come. Again, I was this morning, I was reading it was March 21st, when the government of Alberta said, no, your insurance has to pick up the tab. And on top of that, if it's more than $500,000, you're your own. Now, all of you guys have trees in your municipalities. Those are first 4, it's owned by the county. Natural reserves, campgrounds, playgrounds, trees in hamlet. Then you have a private forest that you guys have it, every farm, and you have a crown land, industrial land. This is a private forest. I paid the consultants to do the inventory for me of the privately owned forest in Alberta 2013. We used the Landsat to find out how many acres of privately owned forest in each county is, like farmers and landowners that owning it. And I look at it and I say, holy, you guys in Peace River, you have around that 3.3 million acres of the forest that owned by the farmers or landowners. And what is the rule? My forest, my land, I can bulldoze this in a jiffy. I was again driving to this morning and I see the fire burning. I can do whatever I want. Now, here's the trick. You as a county and municipality, we cannot tell people what to do with their farm. Nor, I grew up in socialism. Government was telling me and my dad, not me, my dad, what he can do in the farm. I hate it. I will die hating that. But it was a socialist country. But in the same coin, if you do something and affect more people, who is responsible? I'm totally for protect the privacy. Absolutely. I will never cross that line in my darkest. But the question is, what do you guys do in your counties? I'm going to pick whatever, Smoky River, Rhonda, where you come from, and your neighbor that cleared the forest, just wiped out. And no consequences whatsoever. It's my forest, my land. I can do whatever I want. And then you remove the forest. Your neighbor got flooded. Water non boulay, send it to me. Somebody has to pay for that bill. And that's where it gets trickier. Really trickier. So the values, okay, I picked a few of them for this. Storm management, reduce the water erosion. Here is what I try to promote. We always forget. We take for granted Mother Nature. We screw up, and we try to engineer, and it costs us a pile of money. And it's something, all of the trees and the wetlands, and Rhonda was mentioning the wetlands, they perform the functions. It's a God-given function, Mother Nature-given function. We come, we drain, and then we build this. Okay? So I call gray, and the beauty of this, the tree, as the ages increases, gray infrastructure, as the ages is decreasing. I was looking in your county, the asset, how much you owe the buildings and all of things, $70 million and on and on. And based on that asset, you're borrowing the money or asking government for money to do the work, right? So what they did, Sturgeon County hired me and said, Tosha, we want to start with a project, small little project in Cardiff Park, to figure out, they have a main lakes, what is the value of the trees? And can we measure that? And then we're going to look whole county, private or public. We're going to start with the public, but we're going to later on in private. Oh, this is not supposed to be here. Okay, I'm going to go back to the slide. So what I did, I measured over there individual data collection, heights, measurement, and everything else. We put a plot, measure the tree inventory to find out. We use the American software, which is very well used around the world, to measure the value of the trees and their functions based on science. You can download this software for free, iTree tool. And this is what I got. So I measure individual trees, what is we call structural value, $650,000. I measure a sample plot, $60 million. Okay, you can question that. But then I measure the avoided runoff. How much those trees, by standing there, is avoiding the cost of the runoff, year after year. Okay? And that's the difference. And on top of that, county said because they are heavy industrial area, they will take a carbon sequestration storage, go to the industrial area in Fort Saskatchewan and say, we can sell you this carbon, by the way. By keeping these trees in our land, we can sell you this and trade you because this tree grows every year and take a CO2. Okay, and there is a pollution removal, which you, Amy, will be also very interesting as well. Then I went to town of Torsby. You guys, I didn't know what a little bit about politics, but I always find it interesting fighting between the town and the county. Holy macro, it's scary. Town of Torsby are paying 2 times more taxes on their residents than the county who are just across the street. Well, the county residents are taking all of the benefits of town of Torsby, and they struggle. So they hire me. The council, this was a crucial point, the council figured out trees are our asset that we can do when we do the government reporting. There is an asset there. And based on that, we were able to get the money to do the work. Because in infrastructure, our towns are declining rapidly. So they find out, okay, we can use the structural value of $2.5 million for the forest that is owned on the riparian area that everybody is using in a small little town as a structural value, as asset, and report as asset. I did an inventory there. And then my friends from Grand Prairie, from the Greenview County, they said to me, Tosha, I want to hire you in the Grand Cache. So I went over there, did the inventories, worked with the great staff of the county of the Greenview, and I measured every tree. And again, avoided runoff. It's just for that small little town. That doesn't include other county municipally owned forested land. Because you guys in county, you have natural reserves, you have this, you have that you guys own. Eventually you guys own. And then you have a private land. So there is an asset there. And they use this inventory, what I've done for them, as an asset or the reporting. Because those trees do perform the function. You remove those trees, you're going to have a less real estate property values. You're going to have a more erosion. You're going to have more problems. And so there's a real asset. Why should you conduct the inventory? Again, there is a list of the things. And again, one of the things I always said to identify the liabilities. Some cases, trees are liabilities. Don't get me wrong. Trees can be liability too. You have a trees on your campgrounds or park, and God forbid hit somebody, you're liable for. One of the things that lots of people hire me now, Alberta Parks hire me to do the campground tree risk assessment all over the central Alberta. Because unfortunately, one kid got killed and the lady got paraplegic. So you guys in the county, if you have a campground that you are leasing, or you anyway, you're not leasing, but you are charging, if you have a trees on it, something happened, you're liable, period. You didn't perform the duty of care. And judge is going to right away say you pay it. Okay? In the municipal world, this is what they said. The bringing the green structure, which is trees and wetlands and everything else, is identified as an investment. It's a same playing field as a gray infrastructure. Okay? Now, liabilities. Here is what I was asking anybody from insurance. This is your guy's liability. Fires are frequent. It's not going to stop. As a friend of mine had said to me, Tosha, what do we do with these trees? Do we bulldoze them? Where can I sell it? One of the maybe option is you maybe can harvest, put in a bioenergy project and provide the heat and power and get the young forest come back. Destruction of the rural roads infrastructure. As I said, the government of Alberta is going to say, you guys in the county's municipality, you have to pick up the tab. And on top of that, not just you, but you as a person have to pick up the tab. Now, my question is, who pays? Who pays for losses? And on top of that, who is liable? As this gentleman who wants to sue the farmer nearby, a large operation, he is liable for this. And I said, okay, how are we going to get around that? You have to prove in the case of the court, right? And that's the question that you have to ask yourself. Number one, how much you have. And go back to this slide that I skipped that should have been this one. Mike, for the political leaders, do you guys have any bylaws? Some of the county, like if you go to Lamont County, they will tell you now with the trees, with the flood, they incorporated the trees in their county bylaws. You cannot clear the trees along the roads of critical infrastructure. They incorporate in their municipal development plan, MDP. Many counties, like in Rocky View counties, you cannot clear the forest, even if it's your own, just as you want. It's an effect. You have to consult the county. They will give you still can do it, but you have to consult the counties. So and the other thing, here is what you guys can face. Litigations among the different users. If tomorrow sue, and your municipality is always target. Somebody sue you and say, by the way, your cause you haven't, and again, fair enough to the people who told me this, why the municipality didn't bring the bylaws. They are liable, they haven't, legally, I have a book called Tree Laws of Canada, And that book is a really good book for me as an arborist and forester. And there are all of the cases in the last 100 years about the tree issues. And one of the biggest issue with the municipality is, have you performed the duty of care? And yes and no. Do you have a policy in place? If you don't have a policy in place, right away you haven't performed the duty of care. Doesn't matter what you do. And it's scary. So, in the conclusion, really pay attention who is going to be paid. I don't want to guys scare you. This is not what I want to do. I want to encourage you what Rhonda and Adam do, and many of you do here. Try to promote and keep those trees. Try to work with those landowners. Try to educate landowners and farmers, but also educate the political leaders. Try to understand that somebody, there is a cost and consequences of removing the trees. Do we like climate change or not? It's a trigger. You have a climate change, follow the fire, follow the flooding, follow the conversion, and loss of forest. Those are real everyday life for many of you here, guys. You're facing that. And you come to your the council meeting and say, we need to increase the budget for this, for that, and it's like, I don't have a money, buddy. My thing is, at least what you might do as a county, I don't want to now be a sales person for my business, but really find out what you have. You can go back in your county. All of you guys have air photos. I can go back, or satellite even. I can go back to your county in 2000, and I said, okay, where is the flooding happen? And go backwards and say, why? Where the future flooding is going to happen? What can I do about it? What can I work with the landowners? Is there policy in place or not? How can I protect critical infrastructure in the case of the fire? Do at least diligent work. And again, you have great people that you do lots of extension education, but I think all of you combined have to come up with something. Because otherwise, who pays for losses and liability is going to come like a storm to you guys. And it is. I look at now from, again, other side, and I shake my head and said, but in many cases, people are rightful and said, hey, no, I got the real losses and my insurance doesn't want to cover. What do I do? And in some of those people said, I have $1 million house, and government said, you're only on $500,000. Have a nice day, buddy. And insurance, I know in Strathcona County, I think the Strathcona County now requesting for some of those acreage areas, you have to perform the fire smart parts of your taxes. Because I'm not sure of that. That is recorded. Forgive me, Strathcona County, if that's the case or not, but it's very important you pay attention. And this photo is taken from the Wild Rose Ranch, beautiful place, in the Monday morning, beautiful in the fall. Keep this beautiful watershed beautiful as it is. Try to do as much. I always said, go back to my business. Do diligent work, do informed decision. Fire will keep going. Flooding will be there. Conversion, I think we can stop. We can protect some of the area. We can still plant the trees. In some cases, we might remove the trees. In some cases, we may add the trees to protect our infrastructure. But at least be, guys, aware there is a cost. And are we willing to pay for that cost as a society or not? And how are we going to pay? And some of the cases, we have no control. When I got that from Insurance Bureau of Canada, and they told me most of the insurance is changing now policies so rapidly, because especially now after flooding of the BC, you're going to see how some of the policy changes, guys, in the insurance. And it's going to hurt us. No doubt about that. I took way too much time, as usual. And I'm going to be here all day, so if you guys have a question, anything later on.
Thank you very much, Tozo. So we will take questions at the end of all the speakers. We'll have the panel discussion. So please write down any notes you have or thoughts you have. If you want to stick something on the board, please do so. And we'll move on to our second speaker. So Graham Powell is a third-generation farmer from the La Glace area, producing grain and cereal crops. We met Graham a few years ago. I don't know, a few, 4-ish, because Graham had some things happening on his landscape that we thought maybe we could work together to improve. So Graham's going to talk to us a bit today about what he's been dealing with.
I have not given 2,700 speaking engagements, so I'm an auctioneer, so I just want to say check internet, but we'll go on from there. So I do farm at the La Glace area, and I'm a little bit of a history about me and the land. My grandfather, he bought it in probably the 70s. He was farming a different area before that. And then they grain farmed until 2000, my dad and my grandfather, and in the mid-90s, they brought in some buffaloes, and they were mixed farm. And then they sold out of grain farming in about year 2000, and then in 2009, everything completely went sideways, and they sold out the buffalo. So then the land sat pretty quiet there for about 3 years. We didn't do much, hated a little bit, and that was it. And then I wasn't smart enough to go to college, and I decided to go grain farming, which I'm questioning. But I still didn't go to college, so that's what I'm stuck with. And anyway, so I took it over, and by this time my grandfather had a stroke, and so he still lived on the farm, but he wasn't able to communicate very well, didn't have much insight. I mean, I'm sure he did, but he just couldn't communicate it, and my family, my parents had moved to town. So I took it on, and I still don't know what I'm doing, really, with the water especially, and I knew there was a major water run problem, and that's as long as I can remember it was there. And it's not something I could talk to a neighbor about. Like, I could quiz them all about growing canola, whatever fertilizer rates, what they're seeding for, all of that, what equipment to use. But the water run was tricky, and I really didn't know. I just knew there was a problem. There was about 50 acres to get to that I just, in the spring you couldn't get to it without going all the way around the highway. It was about I had to go about a mile. And on the pavement, and sketchy, and then I had a good neighbor that let me sneak through about 500 yards or maybe a little longer of his field just to seed this 50 acres. And in the fall, it would usually dry up enough that I could get a grain truck maybe through there, get the combine through there. But then as the farm grew, the equipment grew, and there was no way to get the newer equipment or a semi through that water run. And the first year I had to auger it across, and I knew we had to do something. The water run was getting worse. I still didn't know what I was doing, and so I didn't know what to do, but I applied for the environmental farm plan, and lo and behold, people who knew a lot more than me seen this project, and it was Jill Henry from the county, and then brought in the Watershed Alliance, and took control, which was amazing, because I just didn't know, and they did know, and all I wanted was a crossing, and I didn't care how I did it or what they did. As long as I got a crossing to get to that 50 acres, that's the biggest thing for me. And so they come up with a plan, and that sounds good to me. Okay, yeah, sure, whatever you want. And because I know when someone knows more than me, probably just let them go. If they were going to tell me how to grow canola, I might have questioned them, but when it come to the water and the erosion, that was all on them. So that was good. I mean, and so they tackled this project. I got my bridge, and so that was a start. And then it gets me thinking too. I know there was erosion, and when I started, it was I thought, well, you read everything on the internet, no-till, and then when you live in Buffalo Lakes and it freezes every month of the year, you realize maybe some black dirt in the spring is good. So now I put the anhydrous on. I try to get it on in the fall. But where there's pea stubble, I try to avoid that just because of the erosion problem. Some of the slopier land, the pea stubble, you hit that with the anhydrous, there's obviously no roots left, nothing to anchor it, and then you have all kinds of problems. So I have clued into that, learned about that, and so that's one of the things I do. A few other things, I've got some notes here maybe I should even look at. Smarter at one time. So yeah, the pea stubble, and yeah, I didn't want to anhydrosat. But it's a balance, because I know farmers know time is of the essence, and this one, the 1/4 where the erosion is the worst, it's great to wait till it's perfect conditions and no-till it in there, but it's not great seeding the 15th of June. That doesn't pan out for where I am. So I had to balance whether you want black dirt, get on it early, try and save moisture, but typically in the spring, I'd seed mostly farm about 1,500 acres by myself, and time is critical because stuff breaks down more than it should, and I got to get the job done. So I didn't want to just keep it worked up black, and I didn't want to, you don't know. So what I decided was I try and put the anhydroson or seed perpendicular to the slope and try and slow the water down. That seemed to be a balance, a bit of both, catch some water, but then still get a bit of black dirt. And go back to the bridge. So I didn't know they come up with a crossing. I assumed to just put a culvert in. That's what you do. It seems like people put culverts in. But when they explained it to me, and what makes sense is that it acts as almost like a funnel, and that'll actually speed the water up. And so then it's great leading up to the culvert, but downstream of it, then you get a lot more velocity on the water, and it could create further erosion and that type of thing, and also it could freeze. And I mean, even this bridge on extreme runoffs, it's not going to be most likely this year, but in past years, it's upright level with the bridge. So that's another thing that the experts did, and I was grateful for. So that was one thing. A few other things here. I'm glad that he took as much time as he did, because I don't know that many words, and I'm not going to use 20 minutes. So one thing too that I mean, it's not all perfect. There's hit and miss with what everything they did. The trees, they did seed some trees. We had an unfortunate deal last year. We had very little snow cover, and the trees, very poor survival rate, unfortunately, on the trees. So I mean, there's not much you can do necessarily about that. If you don't get any snow, you don't get any cover, and I don't know if it's just too cold or the moose got into them or what. But that was one thing that didn't go as good as it could have. I mean, I'm not going to say there's good and bad of everything. Most of the rocks, they did a bunch of rock structure, placing boulders, and that was unfortunately it was mostly during September, October, I believe. And so I wasn't around much. I would check in if it was kind of a rainy day or I was not harvesting. But they placed a pile of boulders and did a bunch of excavating and that type of thing. And we had a couple of big runoffs since there, and they held up pretty well. A few got jostled out of position, which was to be expected, but most of them stayed in place. And what I did notice too, before we did any of this work, you'd go to put anhydrous or do some harrowing in the spring. You'd notice there'd be a big erosion, and it would be a branch off, like a tributary trying to start almost. So you'd get to it with the drill or whatever. Then you have to make a big wide curve around, and you give up more acres doing that. And then just to get around it, you leave lots of acres that never got, well, not lots of acres, but a few acres that never got seeded. And then now it's not that they're just not seeded, but I found they're full of weeds too. There's no competition, and they're hard to control, and it's hard to get a sprayer right close to the edge. If you're using Trimble GPS, you really don't get real close to the edge, and I found, so now I have weed problems because it's dirt, bare dirt right up to the edge, and there was no roots, no support. So I did seed, so we get some Timothy grass seeded in there to try and stabilize it, and these shrubs, some of them have lived, so there'll be some shrubs lived, and then a lot of they did a lot of seeding in the bottom of the banks, and then that has actually worked out, I think, really well from what I can see, because it's starting to grow up the sides of the banks, and that's really starting to anchor some of it. So, I mean, from a farmer's point of view, I just want to be able to farm up, not right next to it, but pretty close, and not have to worry about it sloughing in, because I have a regular natural creek in my land as well, and that is mature enough and no issues that you can pretty much take the same path every year, and it doesn't slough in, and no issues there. But this ditch that they worked on, I believe it was cut. I don't know. There was water erosions before in probably the 60s. I think I talked to some of the old neighbors. There was a rain in 60 something or another that created huge runoff, and there's ditches still from, I can remember people saying there was no ditch there, and we had a big 3 or 4 day rain, and then there's been a water run there ever since. So I don't know if they're from that or not, but then the county did come in and start like in the 60s or 70s and tried to clean them up a bit, and then that was great for getting some of the water off the field, but it took lots of topsoil and everything else off the field too. So they cut them pretty straight, the one anyway. It was cut pretty straight. And so now with the erosion project, and they put some baffles in and some rock structures, and I mean, it's too early to really tell, but you can kind of see there's getting a bit of a curve to it. And as what I've learned, the slower the water, the better for everything. Even last summer, after our horrible heat wave there in June, everything was dead. But if you walked down into the water path there, into the channelway, it was still moist. And in previous years, it was dried up. Like something like that, it would be just powder down there. And there was even, I don't know, was it 2-3 years ago, fish? There was fish in there 2 years ago. And I have there was suckers like 40 years ago apparently in the main creek, but never up the channel run. Never did I imagine that there would be fish, just beyond belief. So seeing that in just such a short period of time has really kind of opened my eyes in some ways, just the way I look at things and what can be done. Every situation is different, and I'm still no expert, and I'm leaving it to the experts. But it is quite a transformation I have seen in such a short time. I think going forward, in 10 years, it's going to look completely different. A 4-year project with dirt and water. I mean, most times you do a 4-year project, you got to line it up with your hand just to maybe see if anything moved. But this is like a night and day. Some of the drone footage is unbelievable. So yeah, it's that's my take on it as a lowly grain farmer from Buffalo Lakes. But it is something I know different neighbors have stopped in and had a look and inquired about some other stuff being done. And I mean, you talk to everybody, and they all have an idea on what. And if I would have talked to 5 different people and got 4 people saying the same answer, I would have maybe done that. But when you talk to 5 different people and get 6 different answers, you probably start to question whether maybe you should look for some advice, like from someone who knows what they're doing. And so reaching out to, started with the environmental farm plan. And then Adam has got in touch with the different groups and Cows and Fish, and they just ran with the ball. And I just said, give her whatever you think. I don't know, and I'm trusting you. If I fly to Mexico, I don't want to be in the cockpit. I want to be in a seat. So that's I'm way short of my 20 minutes, but I don't know any more words. And thankfully. It doesn't matter because I'm going to be done. So that's all I got.
Thank you, Graham. It's okay if you don't have any more words. Working with Graham was a really good project for Mighty Peace, Cows and Fish, ACA, County of Grand Prairie, Oz, Woodland Extension. So we know that we can't always come and take a look at your area or your project and see what we can do, but phone us, ask us the questions, and we can see what we can help with. Then it needs to be a partner project. As with most of the work that we do, it is a partnership. And when we talk about surface water management planning, it is a partnership. It's everybody working together to come to an outcome that hopefully we can all appreciate. We do have pictures and stuff here of the work that was done at Graham's, and if you want to see some of that a little later on, we can pull some of that up. Otherwise, you got a 15-minute break, and we'll get started again at 3:15.
So you're going to get a bit of an infrastructure perspective from a biologist. I'll tell you, it's tough to follow Graham because he's exactly what we're talking about. We're producers who are producing crops and their livelihood and are still thinking about the rest of us downstream. So kudos to Graham and all your other producers out here. We're very appreciative of you doing that, and we know that this is a difficult thing to think about, how you can continue to operate your livelihood and your farm and be concerned about problems downstream. So when I think about this, I have to step back. I think always from the watershed scale. So before we talk about infrastructure, I think we need to talk about streams and rivers. This is how water moves across the land. This here is the Mighty Peace watershed. It comes in from BC. All these squiggly lines are tributaries. Water flows from the high points down to the river and out to the Arctic Ocean, right? Simple enough. The rivers do three things: move water, move sediment, so rocks, gravel, sand, silt, and dissipate energy. And all that squiggliness is how they do it. This here is essentially a ditch. It's straight. It's an engineered, it could be a pipe, right? It can only move water from point A to point B at a set rate, and that's really all about the head, how high it is and how much it drops. This, on the other hand, is a river. And it does a lot of things. It moves water, it moves sediment, it'll spread that sediment out, dropping it at the slow spots here, picking it up, dropping it here. And the big thing it does is it dissipates energy. Energy is that force that erodes. So if we can take some of that energy out and dissipate it as we go down the landscape, we can deal with our erosion issue. And essentially, this is part of the plan for what's happening at Graham's place. Like he said, there was a ditch put in, there was a straight channel, and the water didn't have anywhere to go. So it was digging down, and then everything just started to cave in on it, right? If you get that water to start to serpentine, you're going to dissipate some of that energy. The other thing I really think is important when we start to think about water in the landscape is that this is dynamic. It can handle a range of flows. This has one max capacity, right? It's a pipe. If you exceed that capacity, you're going to blow it out. This can adjust. It doesn't mean there's not going to be problems, but it's dynamic. The other thing we have to think about is that where we generally see water, that's just a small part of the channel. Often, people realize there's a floodplain, and they think about something that's in hydrology referred to as a floodway. And people see that, okay, that's where high waters go. Yes, and those of us who deal with water a lot tend to look at something called the 1 in 100 year flood. It doesn't mean it comes every 100 years. It means if you were to roll a dice that was 100-sided every year, you have one chance of having that amount of flow based on historical flows. So then we think about this is where it really could be. And for this river to really function as it should, it needs access to all of this. Otherwise, you get into a pipe situation, the flows get faster because they're not spread out, and they bore through things. So on the landscape, we've got streams and rivers, the squiggly lines. The other things we have are those annoying low spots, wetlands, whatever. These things you're going to tend to find in an intermediate position. They can be anywhere, but they're often between the highest points on the land and the lowest point. So there, water comes off fields, off roads, off cut blocks, and before it gets to that river or lake, there's often a wetland area. And that's an area where water slows down and sticks around for a bit. It can also go into the groundwater. It's a really important area for slowing down water and improving the water quality because it takes out a lot of the sediment and other pollutants in there. What this may look like is that part of the corridor that always floods. Every field, not every field, but a lot of fields have this, right? There's that area that it's always wet. Sometimes we seed, sometimes we don't. Wetlands are defined as an area where water is there often enough that you change the soil. So you can go look at the soil and it's got different characteristics, as well as different vegetation. So if you have cattails growing in this part of the field, it may be that that's actually a wetland. A wetland doesn't have to be wet every year. It can be every couple of years, but it means that's an area on the landscape where water tends to go. And again, we're not saying you can't drain. No, not me. I'm not going to say that. Water Act. It's not a problem to clear land for agriculture. That's good. I like to eat. I want you to be producing food. I'm just saying we have to be careful about some of these places we clear because they have multiple functions when we think back at the watershed scale. It's not just about producing food, it's also about how we manage water. So these areas are those low wet spots, and that's wetlands. So that's the second piece on the landscape. And the third piece is really us, right? We do a lot of things out there. We got roads, we got houses, acreages, lawns, we've got oil and gas, we got pipelines, well sites, fields. All these things are happening, right? It's a busy place. And we've put our stuff on top of this. This is the hydrological network for the piece. Right about there is Rycroft. So it looks like this, right? It looks like my children when they were learning to draw, right? Blob things and squiggly things, that's water. That's how it goes across the landscape. If we overlay the human footprint, so these are the things that humans have put on the landscape, you can see we have straight seismic lines. We have straight roads. We have square fields, square lease sites. We have cut blocks, sometimes they are a little bit funkier now, but any of these squiggly things you see are actually just places where we have rivers. Water is doing that. So we have this issue where we, as people are doing things, and we use a different system than water does. And that's sometimes where we have our conflict. So, if we step back and think about streams, rivers, wetlands, and the landscape, what's going on, the infrastructure problem is this. And this is the BC flood this summer. There are the big events, and everyone knows about them. They're catastrophic. We will never get rid of these. I don't think we can manage these away. That's not the issue. We could reduce how bad these are. But I think more importantly, we know that at some scale, all of these losses are very, very expensive. I know as a municipality, you are carrying more and more of the share. Less and less of that is being picked up by the province, by the federal government, and by the insurance companies. So what can we do when we're talking about infrastructure and losses due to surface water? Well, we have to start thinking about what those losses are. And I think a big part of this is these small repairs. It's just that there's so many, they add up. What does it cost to repair a culvert? Times by how many in your MD or county? This is my township road. Every spring, and this happens to be February, but every spring this happens. Same spot. And if I wanted to gravel my driveway, yards and yards of gravel every year. Every once in a while, when you have a big runoff, we have to close the road. Okay. But there's a lot of gravel that comes off. So these costs add up because it happens in how many spots across your municipality, right? So that's expensive. And I started to phone around and ask a bunch of people, and some of you in the room, what are you guys spending on this sort of work? And it's all these things, culverts, crossings, people going out and trying to pump water from one place to the other. And here is a mid-range figure I got for people saying this is our infrastructure costs, not of everything, but of repairs due to surface water. And I got everything from half this to 10 times this. But there's a lot of money going in yearly to trying to fix things that happen because of flowing water, surface water, and how it runs off. Okay. The other piece, and again, this comes back to a bit about the wet spot. There are certain parts of the landscape that hold more water or slow water down more and have more of a retention effect. And if those are taken out, we're going to lose them. And Tozer talked a lot about this, about trees and shelter belts. So that's why this is up here. But the question about a lot of this is there's extra damage. It's not just having to fix your culverts, your roads, your bridges. You're going to have campgrounds. That came up again, Tozo. There's going to be other infrastructure, landfills, whatever, you have to close. Or what about the agriculture side? We started to ask around and try to get some numbers on this, and it was tricky. But in 2020, in the piece, 178,195 unceded acres due to surface water. That's a lot, right? That's a lost opportunity for a farmer to make a living. And that's the same amount of water that's going to be affecting infrastructure, roads down the way, right? So we know there's a big issue. And it's tough to put a number on that. This was a tour I took with, at that time, the chairman of the Mighty Peace up to one of the municipalities, and somebody had started a very small drainage ditch. Thing is, if you start small and it goes far enough and there is no resistance and it's straight, it gets very big very quick. This was almost an 8-foot ditch at some point. And the challenge here is, who's in charge of this? Who's liable for this? If it goes from one owner to the next, is it the owner? Or is it the municipality? What happens if we have someone get hurt in that? Or a field? And this isn't something unusual. We come across this again and again. There are concerns about people engaging in surface water management, and if that has a negative impact downstream, right? So, yeah. So I think what we're trying to do is say, we're going to look at this at a big scale. Because as one property owner, you're going to affect the next one, right? Can we do something more effective, something more coordinated? And so if we start to think about these wet spots in the field and what they're worth, can we do that? Can we figure out a cost of that and say, this is like a retention pond. This is, instead of us going and hiring an engineering company to put in a retention pond to protect this culvert, this bridge, this road, could we maybe pay someone or help someone leave this in their field to do that? What would that be worth? Or if we're in charge of maintenance, should we maybe not rip down every tree? Maybe we could leave some of those trees there to provide that slowing down, to dissipate that energy, to slow erosion so that the bridge downstream of here doesn't have to be replaced every 3 years. Well, surprisingly enough, the insurance companies have done this for us. Why? Because it's getting really, really expensive for them. Tozer talked about this. This is just a continuation. They do not want to pay because they want to make money. So they've tried to figure out what we can earn from leaving these features of the landscape. So here's a couple examples from that one report. There's a lot of those out there now. There's a pond, a bunch of ponds in Gibbons worth 3 to 5 million, 3.5 to 4 million a year in flood protection, or stormwater, pardon me. There's a naturalized channel. So one of those straight channels, if you put some curves back in, put some vegetation in, they say it's worth $1.2 to $1.4 million a year. There are some wetlands in southern Ontario, reduce flood damage, and this one I like, and cost of building to $3.5 million in rural setting. And this is rare. It's easy to find these numbers for urban sites, right? You have big, dense cluster buildings, expensive. Insurance companies love looking at that. But this is rural. 3.5 million a year, rural. And again, engineered wetlands in Manitoba, 3.7 for flood reduction, water quality. These things have an annual return. And I think we need to find the solution because the challenge is there are producers trying to make a living on this piece of land, and we're going to be looking at them saying, but you also have the means of saving our infrastructure. So how can we work together? What is that common solution? Is there a way to do this? And that's really the question that we want to come back to. Because as a producer, they're also a ratepayer. We don't, we know where taxes are going. But if we look together, are there ways we can help support agricultural production on our landscape that's also beneficial to downstream municipalities because they're not paying for so much infrastructure replacement? With that, I'm going to hand this back over to Rhonda to introduce the next speaker. Oh, no, go ahead, yeah.
175,000 acres, roughly, unseeded from the flooding.
In 2020.
Times 40 bushels.
Yeah.
It's a 7 million bushels of canola. Times $20, $114 million is the cost of that flooding of unseeded.
And I should mention that's only from AFCS. I couldn't get the other numbers, and they figure they insure 92 to 95% of the producers in this region. So there's another whatever percent out there.
People probably don't grasp, like $140 million. I calculate canola 40 bushel, probably it's 50, but anyway, here. $140 million just lost in the crop production because of flooding. Okay, you guys farmers are here. That's a quite big number for us.
It's a big number. Yes, it is. And it concerns all of us, right? So the next speaker, our last speaker, is John Pattison Williams. John is a researcher with the Department of Resource Economics and Environmental Sociology at the University of Alberta, and he is the president of Pattison Resources Consulting. This company specializing in interaction between environmental conservation and economic development. Welcome, John.
Let me just test this out. Yeah, okay. All right, thank you, everyone. And it's always that hard spot in the day to be the last one. I'm sure you're all looking forward to getting home, and I got a long drive ahead of me, too, back to Camrose tonight, so I won't keep it super short. But yeah, so as she said, my name is John Pattison Williams, and I'm a researcher and an academic, and so don't start throwing things at me. I see already a hand up, academics. I do a lot of work. I teach economics and business and finance at the U of A, and so particularly this area of natural resource economics. I teach the senior courses in the department, economics and natural resource management. So don't hold that against me. Economists are quite boring on a whole, and I know I've been called, in the last couple of weeks, I've been doing some work with stakeholder groups, and I got a few emails like, you are such a moron. Because without even knowing, but they're saying, you know, an academic sent you something by an email. Well, by that definition, you're probably sitting in an ivory tower somewhere and have no touch with reality. And, you know, maybe that's true. Maybe I don't have any touch with reality. But I also kind of juggle a few things, so this is sort of a bit of a background. My wife and I and our little kid, we farm on a family farm just outside of Edmonton, and we raise quarter horses and a bunch of grain and hay. But Naomi, my wife, always says, like, what? It's really hard for me to tell people what you do. She's like, I do teach, but I have a consulting company, and we farm at the same time. But we all kind of sort of juggle each of those things, and I think that hopefully that improves some of the work that I do, so I'm not so siloed in. Might mean that I'm just doing a poor job of everything, jack of all trades. But I hope today that some of what I can touch on will build upon what we've heard previously. And so I wanted to say in the workshop so far, I really appreciated what Tozo had to say about forests. You know, if you listen only to him, you'd think that, you know, the silver bullet to everything is keep the trees on the land. And if you listen to me, you probably think the only thing is to keep wetlands on the land. Somewhere the truth is in the middle of that, I think. We have a habitat, we have an ecosystem and a habitat that's very complex, and they provide different services, and somehow we need to live on this landscape as humans. This is what sustains us economically and financially, and also broader terms, it sustains sort of our societal level, how we operate. I do have to give a little caveat or whatever the start would be about flooding and infrastructure. I'm not going to focus specifically on roads and infrastructure today, though I will touch on it. But I have a bias against it, because a few years ago I was thought I was cool. I was 22, 23, and a couple of buddies and I, we decided it was spring on our farm, and there's some drainage canals running through an old creek, and you know, it's April, and the water was high, so we jumped in our old battered canoe and thought we'd go do a nice little, let's paddle down to the Battled River. Wouldn't that be fun? And, it was two of us and then his girlfriend, and she sat in the middle, and we're paddling along feeling, top of the world. And then suddenly a friend said, hey, there's a lot of water here right now. I'm like, yeah, that's true. Like, we're getting some good speed. I said, oh, shoot, there's a culvert up ahead. I said, whatever, we'll just jump out and get that. So I jumped out to pull the canoe up to the side, and there was no bottom where I jumped to. It was washed away, and I started spinning and hanging on. I'm like, and they were laughing at me. Oh, look at that, you fall, and that's funny. And so I bumped up against the culvert, and suddenly I could feel, when you're talking about a funnel, Graham, I could feel an undertow on my feet. I'm like, oh shoot. And I had about a moment of just to gasp some air and suck down, and measured after about 6 feet down, caught the undertow, and was shoved through that culvert. It was a bigger culvert, and it was about 120 feet long. And I just remember just banging and crashing and just sort of this panic, and suddenly being spit out the other end. Whew. And then, so I'm sort of stunned sitting there, and suddenly the canoe comes shooting through. It was that strong, it had sucked the canoe down through, and oh man, it was, I think one of the closest calls I've had in my life. And, if there had been an obstruction there, if there had been anything, that would have been it. I wouldn't be standing in front of you here today. I just say that, putting my bias out front, watch it out for that runoff. That's what I'm thinking about. But anyway, let's get to some real work here. So I'm going to focus particularly, we heard from Adam and Rhonda on the four sort of pillars of your watershed plan, and of course, saline and water quality, but I'm going to focus specifically on wetlands today. And some of my background, I want to just as well just start it off. We're from a family farm, and I think I'm going to focus on agriculture a little bit today. And how many farmers in the room? You put up your hand. I'm not attacking you, just putting that out there, because the questions I'm raising are ones that we're facing on our farm too. All I'm saying is agriculture is so important to our cultural and economic background here. Of course it is. And yet I think we also gotta, speaking from experience, say, hey, not everything we do is necessarily the right thing for our downstream neighbors. We're operating. I'm a business person, so you're thinking on what makes you the finances and keeps the money on the table, food on the table for your family. You're not always thinking about your neighbors, though we like to think we are. Sometimes you just don't have the time or the energy to do so. And a couple of points here. This is my dad, and this is about 4 quarters here. That was peas that year. But I remember we were climbing up on the top of those bins that year, and Dad's in his 70s now and kind of phasing out, and he said, "Gosh, have we done the right thing on this landscape? We've cleared it, we've farmed it, we've pushed everything through." He said, "I look back at the end of my life right now and think, I don't think we did." And I contrast that with, that's my little son there on the bottom left. He's very short. That's one of the sort of larger wetlands on saline lakes, but it would still be classified as a wetland on our property. And that was last summer. And you just think, man, you see that water level going down and down, and you kind of like, man, you wonder what we're doing for future generations. And I think that's the one thing as an economist. There are ways to capture and think about not just now, the here and now, but we have to think in 3 different time horizons. The current, the midterm, which is a few years down the road, and then long term. Pretty hard to think long term, but I think that I want all of us to keep that kind of in the back of our heads as we go through this. How many of you have heard the term natural capital? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, a few. It's okay if you haven't. I'm not going to get upset. But this is a term that kind of came out in the last, 20 years, 30 years. It's been out there. Basically as a way to realize our current financial system, it sucks. Sounds like you got some opinions there. I think it does. There are problems with it. It might work. It might be the better of other systems that are out there. But let's not constantly forget that in economics, in our market, our current capitalist market system, there is a role. It doesn't get everything. And wetlands, it misses out on. Biodiversity, it misses out on. You can't go out to just click online or go to a shop and say, I want to buy a wetland because I think they're good. And so then you actually have a buyer and a seller of it that can tell you what it's worth. There's nothing out there like that. So when we're trying to figure out what a wetland is worth, well, that's a huge question because to Graham or to myself or some of you that are farming, it can either be something you like on a dry year, or it can be something that really costs you a lot of money. I haven't given 2,700 talks either, far fewer, so I'm still, baby steps. But I gave a talk to the Saskatchewan Association of Rural Municipalities and Watershed Groups a couple of years ago. And, I realized at that point too, after the talk, one of the mayors came up, he's like, man, I thought, when I saw that topic, I thought, boring, I don't want to go to that one. But after he said, actually, there's some thoughts you can bring out from it. And there was a division in the group of the farmers sitting there. Half of them are like, I'm sorry, the only good quarter section is one that has not a single tree on it, not a single blade of grass, and not a wetland. He's like, you raise cattle. He said, if you have a cow bloating out in the field, why would you want to leave it there? And he viewed that wetland as a bloated cow. Well, that's a good image. But this is something that we realize, so to some people it's not worth anything. In fact, it's negative. So if you want to actually incentivize them to keep it on the landscape, what do you do? How do you pay them? How do you pay them for it and determine the correct dollar value? That's kind of been, you might sort of laugh, think, well, what a pathetic life, but that's what I've been doing for about the last 10 years, is research on this, both talking with people, running business models, looking at big numbers, and trying to figure that out. It might seem simple, but when you think of how many thousands of farmers you got in Canada, Alberta even, there's lots of different perspectives on that. And partly because without a system, a financial system that can manage that, how do you capture these benefits? So I'm just going to start with benefits right here. What does a wetland do? And we heard some of these from Tozo as he's looking at forests, and there are comparisons here. But we have functions that regulates air quality, water runoff, erosion, and pollination. That's sort of the regulating. It's a big part in the central pillar of supporting nutrient cycles, soil formation, etc. Obviously, the pink one, you can get hay crops out of it. There's fresh water that's recharged into the groundwater and all that sort of good stuff. And then there's some people that, cultural values, if you like duck hunting or waterfowl hunting, I quite enjoy it. You go out there, that's a huge revenue builder. And, even you think of, you might hate Ducks Unlimited, some people do, some people don't, but that's the whole reason their existence, a bunch of rich duck hunters, sort of Ducks Unlimited people watching the talk, they want to pay for them. And they say, hey, we want to keep the habitat so we can shoot our ducks and have a good time with our buddies. Well, you might hate hunting, but they're still footing a big bill for that. And so there's a recognition that that is a way you can think of how much these things are worth. And and part of it as an economist, sometimes I get tired of some sort of environmental science folks and my colleagues that say, dang, you need to protect that habitat regardless. It's priceless. I'm like, You'd never use that word priceless with someone sort of in finance or economics, because nothing is priceless. Someone will pay something for anything. That word is used out there, but if you're actually putting a dollar figure on it, I just won't say it. So if you're gonna, though, put some dollars to it, which you want to make them right, you don't just want to make up numbers, it has to be built and founded on some scientific knowledge, right? So water filtration. How many tons a year of nitrogen does an acre of wetland actually hold back in a fairly, converted landscape where there's a lot of runoff? What about phosphorus? What about how much soil does it stabilize? Adam talked about all that gravel. You can go and, if you see Adam sneaking around with a shovel and stealing from the county, watch out for that. But, that's something we're thinking about. Flood control, how much volume moves off the landscape? What about carbon sequestration? Again, you might think nothing about, again, as Toza said, who cares if you believe in climate change or not or think it's a thing? There's markets out there paying you pretty well globally. It doesn't matter if it's a left-wing or right-wing government, there's a market for it right now. And all over the world. So you can get with the program and get paid because you actually see that you're getting numbers for that. And so this is from a study, and I've done this with teams of biophysicists or biologists and chemists and all these groups of other people. They've been working for several years, and we have studies across Canada that have been for about 5 years have been really sinking into capture per acre of wetland. How much are they doing of all these services? This is an example of, in Manitoba, a highly flooded, and if you think it's polarized, the flooding here and downstream use, try down in that old floodplains outside of Winnipeg, and how pissed off they are at the Saskatchewan farmers who are draining their wetlands, which then take them off the landscape, and the floodwaters just push down in the spring, knocking out buildings and everything. And then the Manitobans have to deal with some angry North Dakotans because that's happening, downstream there too. So there's all this at play. So this is from the Manitoba case study, and I'm not going to bore you with all the work on it, but those numbers up there, there's a pointer here somewhere, but I'll just say, anyway. Is it the middle? Oh, yeah, there we go. Those, what do they mean to, if I looked at that, I'm like, I have no clue how that relates. But then if you go and ask your average person, if you're on either a survey or if I talk with all of you, the wetlands sequester 0.043 tons per acre per year of nitrogen. That really gets people excited, right? It doesn't mean anything. But if you translate that plus the phosphorus, this is at the current rate of wetland loss, which is about, in that part, it was a few 0.57% of that area, that watershed. But that's the equivalent of putting 45 truckloads. Just picture that. I used to drive anhydrous ammonia trucks through college. That was the way I made some money. Think if you back up some of the, that's liquid, but you back up some of the solid stuff, back it into your neighbor's lake and just tip it over and dump phosphorus and nitrogen in. That's a good visualization to say, actually, you're doing that to your downstream neighbors. So at that amount, then, you can actually start calculating numbers from it. There's some hard figures. So you can actually see what's that is worth at the current market rate and translate that and say, this is what the damage is that's happening. And yet, and this is the hard one, isn't it? So here's a familiar sight, isn't it, across in the spring in the prairies. Despite a wetland policy in the province, despite a water act that was put in by the Klein government long ago, I remember being a kid hearing about Klein. I didn't know anything about it. And that's been in place for a long time, and yet that continues. And there was a talk a while back, and I mentioned, as I was driving in, I saw some drainage this spring. And it was a crowd like this, and someone at the back who was with enforcement with the water council said, "Excuse me, John, you're a professional agrologist. Did you report that?" And I'm like, he's like, "You have a professional responsibility to report that violation." And he tore a strip off me in the middle of, I felt like such a fool. So please be a little bit kind today if there's anyone that's angry. But I didn't report it. But, because they were neighbors and there's a lot of dynamics there. But this continues despite the fact that there is regulation against it. There's no will for enforcement. There's no ability. You have even though, and I'm through and through a rural person, and we see political power shifting to the urban areas, yes, but there is still a lot. You don't mess with agriculture too much. You look at comparable industries, people tread pretty carefully if you're going after the crop or the beef guys. Just the way it is. And so, just hold that I'm not against anyone, but it's like, there's such a cultural basis of agriculture. They feed us. We feed us, whatever, how you want to use it. But it's part of who we are, I think, as Albertans, and you're pretty cautious before you start ripping into the farmers. And the familiar story, though, is that drainage increases the amount of land available to farm, increases it so you can access it better, which increases production, crops are more viable, especially in low areas that are typically harder to seed. And so, you put that statement out there, and this is a picture of my brother and brother-in-law and I having, multiple perspectives, we could say. We have family disagreements, as every good family will, and you can tell by the middle guy, Mike's, his look at me, he's quite skeptical of what I'm trying to say in that moment. Because as we as a family are seeking to how do we manage, a fairly large grain operation in a way that still we hold that's economically viable, but has sort of a social and environmental responsibility to our neighbors. Because we always talk, you sit around a community hall in a rural area and anywhere in Alberta, you always talk about, man, but we take care of each other. We're good neighbors. And yet, sometimes, especially according to those Saskatchewan guys, half of them were really angry because those guys that said the wetland was like a bloated cow, he just flooded my whole crop this year and I couldn't seed anything and I've just lost millions. So you have that tension within the communities too. And so I think, when you look at this, you have very different perspectives that come out. And you can have the best financial economic models, and a guy will sit back and say, yeah, but I don't believe it. I'm not going to do it anyway. And I think that's the challenge. I think when we were first of all thinking, knowing the science behind hydrology and the biology, sorry, Adam, biologists are great, but you're only one part of the story. And then there was a move that said, hey, but the economists are going to tell us. So of course, I stick my little head up and say, yeah, sure, we can do it. But I think I'm coming to the point where I'm not dissing economists, no. But there is a point where you can have you might talk about your bottom line, but if you don't actually believe it in a sort of a cultural way or just, you're not going to change your practices. Dad did it, Grandpa did it, well, I'm going to do it. Again, not that there's anything wrong with that. I love my dad and my grandfather, and they're very wise men that I really look up to. But sometimes, let's question a little bit too. That's the research side of me. I always question. It's kind of annoying for many people. But and you have to manage this because, we have ag field people here. We have, representatives from councils. We have municipalities. We have farmers. I think, Graham, you said it best. You get 5 people in and they'll give you 6 different perspectives on something. Oh, gosh, that's definitely true. And it doesn't mean that, anyone's necessarily wrong. It just means this is a really tough question to grapple with. And it leads to this. And I'm not going to go into, I took a few slides out during the talk because I thought Tozo hit it really well, so did Adam. So just going to touch this, that flooding, this is just one issue, but it's an important one. And it has massive financial implications. Unseeded acres, you calculate it out. It's big. Nutrient export, well, that might not be the focus here. Maybe it is. I'm not sure. But some of the work I'll show in a couple slides here was in lakes that are being just completely dead. So no one can't fish them anymore. You can't boat on them. And so that nutrient export is quite serious. Think of Lake Winnipeg. All the hog farms, the phosphorus coming out of there. It was a huge, huge issue. So you get, all these lakeshore residents, and no one could go out swimming anymore in Lake Winnipeg. So that's something to think about. Obviously, the damage to infrastructure. Interestingly, I don't know about this municipality or the ones up here, but I did some work with the Camrose County and a few others, and they don't yet, maybe they have now, that was last year, separate out the costs for culverts from just their sort of larger operating costs. So this is something that I was thinking, if we're actually going to get some detailed numbers on this, you got to start, I not telling you what to do, but it might be good to start line by line watching that a little closer because then you can actually track change better. So infrastructure damage is obviously key and big, and then of course you have this social fighting that occurs upstream and downstream. So these are factors that we have to consider. And again, I just left that statement in. You saw way better slides from Tozo and Adam on that. So significant financial resources have been invested, and it will be bigger. You see that, like I said, the investment going into it and the approaches of insurance companies is just building and building. So just a note on that. And I just want to raise this. This is the area in Canada where I've done a lot of work. This is over there, this is called the Prairie Habitat Joint Venture, of which I do some policy work for them. But, and there we are, number 3 right now. And I put that on just to show the context, but this is an area which a research Gauge, somewhere in the States, I believe, did this. Is called sort of a plow print, a land use change, and they update it every few years. No judgment on what's happening, just this is what's happening. And you see that, and I'm sorry they didn't have the Peace Country, so I shouldn't almost put it up there, but I felt like it illustrates in the South what's been happening. But you see that this, purple are cities, all the way from Houston, all the way through Chicago, and then you see Calgary and Edmonton. But the white is the plow print. And this is, cultivated acreage. And that isn't even grassland areas. The grasslands are maintained in the lighter green, forested in dark green. So I know we had a meeting, we have a crop marketing club in our community that there's about 20 producers get together and, have coffee throughout the winter and talk about what you're going to seed and stuff, and try to get a speaker in to think about some stuff as you go. And I know one of them was talking about oil and gas operations on ag landscapes, and where the farmers, and these are neighbors and friends, right? They're like, they're so angry at that. And I remember Dad sort of raised his hand, yeah, but guys, we're upset, but who's changed this landscape more than oil and gas has? I was like, haven't we? And I'm like, no, it can't be. No. It's this idea, and I'm not trying to pit two against each other, but I just, there's a reason for this change, right? This is why we were settled in this country. It's food production, and it's led to great benefits and wealth and all this sort of stuff, but it's come at a cost. And that's one of those principles of economic theory. Every part of life is a trade-off. You can't do one thing without giving up something else. Opportunity cost, all that sort of stuff. So this is what's happened here. And so what do we do about wetlands in that context? And again, I could think about trees, you could think about any sort of ecosystem. In fact, grasslands are really high on the agenda right now, just to keep in the back of your mind. There's a whole North America, Canada, US, Mexico summit right now on grasslands looking at, that's the most threatened habitat in the world, more than the rainforests or grasslands. So stay tuned, you might not like it, but work is coming on grasslands. So what do we do about wetlands? And one, as I mentioned, the science matters, and that statement, the science matters, I hate that statement because, there's a lot of revisions can occur along the way and critique and back and forth. But the biophysical science, we need to know what wetlands are doing, we need to know what the financial side of it looks like, and we have to think about those human perspectives. And so what I have done, I'm trying to make sure I don't go over time. Am I good? Okay. I don't want to bore you all on this. So this is this approach that sort of people talk about a lot, but okay, a lot of conservationists, and then in my consulting world, people came up and said, well, we can't convince people to keep wetlands on their thing. How can we do it? And so partly, as a group, we thought, well, maybe we do this thing, a business case. You do it if you're any sort of small business, large business operation. You kind of weigh the costs and the benefits and come out with a tipping point of where it actually can make you money at the end of the day. And so the purpose of that isn't just a cost-benefit analysis, which we always, you hear that word. Cost-benefit analysis is part of it, but it's not all. And this sort of is to justify an investment. And that is you capture the knowledge that's out there, help support wise land use decisions, and it moves policy forward. And you might hate policy, but it's a reality of our life. It's very, policy is very dull, but it's part and parcel of the landscape we operate in a sort of a society that has the rule of law. And it provides a consistent message then to different audiences. So then my part of all of this is calculating out return on investments of different land uses. And so, this is just and I hate graphs. Math is a big part of what I have to do. So this is just one thing, and I'll leave it at that. But you think of the sum of all the benefits. Benefits are up here, costs are below, and then you can discount them over time horizons to figure out what your future benefits and costs are going to be. So if you're looking at a wetland, you think of the carbon it can capture. Think of the nitrogen and phosphorus and biology and flood control, and you can include things within that equation. And below is this interest rate. So think of how actually, think if you're putting in an investment, how it'll pay back over time. So you calculate that out. On the bottom, and I think the risk that a lot of studies and a lot of messaging has is that they stick with the benefits. So think, and even to think of those unseeded, these acres or something, it's like, wow, you know, a wetland can do X, Y, and Z. You multiply that by this amount of money, and look at that. There's it provides $800 million of benefit a year. Everyone says, wow, that's powerful. Is it powerful? I mean, it is. It sends a message, and I'm not criticizing any work that does that. But if that's not put in context of the trade-off of what that comes at, it loses its power. Doesn't mean that it doesn't have a role, but it loses its power. And there's a bunch of studies that have come out by a guy named Bob Costanza down in the US and others about the global value of the world's natural capital. And a while back they came out with an estimate of 3 trillion or 10 trillion, I don't know, it's a big number, bigger than I'll ever see in my life. And of course that's a signal, but all it is a signal that it's actually worth something. Even if there's no market there, it's a signal. My point is that if you don't bring that into line and perspective with the cost of what that comes at, it's problematic. It only gives you one side of the story. You're an advocate. You're not an objective observer, if that's even a thing. And so what I've tried to do here is include, if you leave a wetland on the landscape, that means that you lose, you can't seed it, and at canola, huge astronomical prices right now, and if you get a decent yield on it, that means that possibly you could be losing quite a bit of money because, yeah, you leave it as a wetland, but it could be canola, that, you know, amazing thing that we all pray for, good weather and hot stuff. So if you contrast that, as well as if you just are going to keep it on the landscape, then that's that part of it. If you want to start restoring wetlands, that's a whole other ballpark, which can take, you know, the estimates, you know, we've lost 70% of the wetlands since European settlement in this part of the world, so we should restore them. Well, maybe here and there it makes sense. Ducks Unlimited would want us to do more, and other groups, but darn, they're expensive to restore, and they might never get back those functions I looked at earlier. In fact, they'd probably take 100, 200 years before they would. So restored wetlands lose a lot of that other, and that's all included in these calculations. It's all, you know, there's lots of numbers deep down in them. But so really, if you're going to restore, that's a whole other aspect to it that you can think about. So an example of how this worked, and this is in the Smith Creek drainage in southeastern Saskatchewan. So just want to throw this one up. I don't have one from the Peace Country. They're very expensive to do, these studies. They take forever, and you know, it's a lot of work. But it's there is a comparability that can be made in terms of it's a similar sort of prairie parklands, prairie landscape. And so you see that in 1958, this was, you saw Adam's screen before of all his kids scriggling and stuff. This is similar. The red are intact wetlands, and then there's a few blue drainage ditches there. Move that to 2009. Take a look at that. And that's very common amongst a lot of watersheds in the prairies. Again, comes at, you know, there's a reason for it. You know, you can grow more grain on it. You can graze a few more cattle. But regardless, you think of what that water is doing, shooting off the landscape right now into Manitoba, into North Dakota. That's a lot more in a short period of time, washing out roads, bridges, homes, etc. And if you get a year where it's actually there's a big snowpack and melting up, it's even worse. So this was the context we were looking at there. And just to keep it simple, using that calculation and the return on investment, and this I've published in the Journal of Wetland who reads academic journals? I know. But it is published, so that at least means that other people looked at it and said, John's not full of crap for what he's writing. You know, there's some reason for what he's done. This showed, what we showed, just for the flooding benefits alone, it's about a 3.17% return on investment for just keeping the wetlands on the landscape. So that means you spend $1 or $3, well, you spend $1 and you get $3.17 back. Just think of it that way. It's easier than some of the bigger stuff. But what some of the, like my, clients haven't always liked is that once you start delving into restoration, no, don't do it. 0.23. You spend $1 and you get 23 cents back. So from a financial perspective, I had to say to somebody, no, do you know what? Your restoration programs, you might be important in certain areas, but it's not giving you a good return on your dollars. So this is why sometimes people hate the economists too, because I'm not saying I'm a wetland advocate. I'm saying you want the numbers on it, let's see what we can do and see what they say. And you notice that obviously it shrinks down. Who's ever going to restore 100%? Nobody, but it's a sort of an academic exercise to kind of give a contrast of extremes. And then I looked at it over time horizons. The one area where it changes a bit is over 30 years as you start to get some of those benefits back, then you see that a bit of restoration could make sense. But it's a short-term investment for long-term gain, which is very difficult for government or NGOs or anyone to be able to justify. So think about that, or especially the private sector. Maybe government is a little better, but then if you start calculating in all those other things that our beautiful capitalist system doesn't capture, biodiversity, you can't get put in the recreation, the hunting, tourism dollars in that. You can get your phosphorus and nitrogen stuff. You add that on top of the flooding, you actually see it's even better. You know, and I'm, again, still not saying restoration's great, but you see that actually you can make a lot of, like it just, like, man, stop draining is what we say to some of these people. Again, this is, I'll put that in context too. Another comparison, so that was flooding. I just want to show this quickly. This is a one in Ontario that was looking at the Lake Simcoe Basin just outside of Toronto, and they had massive phosphorus pollution in that watershed, and the lake was just dying. They had the whole Lake Simcoe phosphorus reduction strategy. The Great Lakes are suffering from it. So again, I was hired to go out and do some work here, and you see in 2008, and about 46% of wetlands have been lost. Different color scheme a little there. But what was disappointing to the people that wanted, they said, we want to focus, let's get a business case for phosphorus and wetlands. That'll make all the difference, that'll convince them. Look at those numbers. Didn't do a thing. So I remember I gave the report, the technical report, and they're like, we don't like that. Like, it shows that, you know what, we'll let it happen because you're only going to get 10 cents back for your dollar. Okay. But I said, okay, again, if you bring in those other numbers, it makes it look better, and it is better, but there's no market for those numbers, so it's pretty hard to justify that investment. But if you look at this slide, which kind of helped a little for a very, grumpy client at that point, was that there was a water treatment plant that the municipality was putting in right around that time. And they were, how many millions they'd put into that. And it was removing about 2,500 kilograms of phosphorus from the watershed a year, and said, okay, so it was so cool that number was there in the watershed and very current. And so basically you could compare that and said, hey, you know what? Yeah, that might not make sense on a bigger scale, but if you lose 25% of your existing wetlands, which I forget how many acres that was, all those millions you're putting into that water treatment plant are being negated. And that really hit this group, and actually it shifted their, a lot of attitudes because you could actually look at and compare that specifics. So it allowed them to do some work on wetland conservation because they're like, whoa. Then why are we doing this? You could justify it to your tax base. You could justify it to your stakeholder groups. So common themes from these. And, I have other ones that I could show, but, don't need to beat a dying. No, that's not a good analogy on it. But restoration is financially and socially expensive. So it's very costly to go and restore a wetland. It's also not that popular in some places. It might help out, so I say socially expensive. It takes a lot of focus from your town, your municipal council, your elected officials to say, actually, we're going to really push through and restore something here. And you have to engage with private landowners. So that whole issue of property rights is really, really key. Again, that property rights, as an economist, you think of it, it has allowed, the growth and the development and all of that we have here, if you can define and legally bind those rights. And yet it comes at a bit of a cost, because there is then the response. So as Toza was saying, how do you capture the fact that you're actually screwing your neighbors? Again, not into socialism or communism, but this is let's be honest, let's be critical of ourselves. Let's keep asking uncomfortable questions, because hopefully, maybe it'll make it better. So the point is, keep what's already on the land. Don't start messing around. If you can, keep it. And then, of course, there are big risks and liabilities around it in terms of lawsuits. As mentioned, inability for insurance. This is at the local, interprovincial, and federal, and international levels. So this is I would say even more so than when some of this work was done a few years ago, this is a higher agenda item, and it's going to be, well, you saw the slides earlier, so I won't repeat that. And I just mentioned this, I did earlier, but there is a wetland policy in place. Who knew? I've been doing work with a bunch of farmers and interviews and stuff, trying to get a landowner guide developed for the wetland policy. 95% of people don't know it's out there. So I'm like, where did that go wrong? It's been since 2003, 2004, and then the policy was in 2013. This is out there. Something could be done, but again, it's unpopular. It pushes back against agriculture. And so I want to sort of finish up the talk looking at a bit more of a specific thing that I think could be interesting for agriculture. Because one of the challenges of all of this, as I've mentioned, is that agriculture is a big player. And they're important. They're part of our livelihood, family, all that sort of thing. And it's been rough. It hasn't been fun being a producer for the last little while. You get wet years. Well, you can't get your crop off. And then my brother and my sister just bought a new grain dryer, because suddenly we never needed a grain dryer in our life. And suddenly, got to do it because we can't get this grain off. Got that in last winter, and then it was so dry last year. It's like, we didn't even use it. So these are the challenges. Bad years. How have people stayed above board? Off-farm income. That's no fun. I mean, if you really believe in your vocation as a farmer and you want to do it, you love farming. I always thought I'd take over the family farm full time. Now, to be honest, I do it part of the time, but I don't do it full time. And that's not, partly that's family stuff. My sister and her husband, I'm the youngest of 4, so, they got it. I didn't, that sort of thing. But partly, I led a different path in life, and I kind of like this stuff too, but I still want to be part of the farm. And so high off-farm income, that's what's kept farms afloat in bad years. Big debt loads. It's uncomfortable, but how are you remortgaging things? It's because land prices have kept going up. And that's a tough question to grapple with, and I think is a question that agriculture as an industry will have to really think about in the future. As long as land prices keep going up, hallelujah. But if interest rates rise, yeah, I know, I know, that's it. They are rising. So they are rising. My dad always and mom talk about the 80s when they were paying 20% interest on their mortgage. I was like, it just about sunk us several times. And so I'm not saying that's coming. I'm not a fortune teller, but, this could be something we have to think. So the point is, there's uncertainty. And, you have grain prices, well, they're a little higher this year, partly as a result of threats in Russia and Ukraine, breadbasket of most of Europe and Asia. If there's war there, you're not going to have one of the biggest wheat-producing regions of the world competing with our wheat. So this is part of all these factors. We live in an interconnected macroeconomic system that what happens, tips over there in Russia, hits us immediately here. So think about that. You also see, of course, cash receipts last year did increase. But increasing acreage, so how do you, increasing productivity, how do you keep rural communities alive? I really believe in this. We wouldn't have, my wife's from England, I convinced her to move to rural Alberta a couple of years ago, and because I love it and she loves it, but the trend is the other way. We're losing youth. How do you keep your kids on the farm? Those are important questions. I was in 4-H and I gave public speaking stuff on that lots, trying to rah. But it's an important thing that we want to try to do. And also, I know everybody here probably loves government. I think you love Trudeau a lot, that lady at that table. She was singing his praises a few minutes ago. Oh, she missed it. Oh, it's always my jokes fall flat from. Oh, that's true. Yeah, the Liberal membership sold for sale over there. No, but there is a frustration with levels of government. Not municipal governments. They're typically they're pretty well respected, I would say. But when you get provincially and federally, man, people don't like government right now. Arguably, they never have, but there's a cynicism that's crept in now that's hard. So this is, again, all in this uncertainty that we're facing today. And so, if you're going to keep wetlands, farmers have opportunity costs. They could grow canola. They have nuisance costs. You got to go around those things. It takes more time. There's seed overlap. Even with precision agriculture, it's not as great. Then there's those restoration costs of securing it and administering it and running the program to keep it and monitor it. So these are expensive things, and who's going to pay for them? So what we thought is, okay, well then, if that's the case, a couple friends and I, consultants as well, we went in to think of, okay, well, maybe we can show that this marginal land and wetlands might not be, maybe that narrative that, well, we got to drain it, seed it, and that'll make the big bucks. Maybe that's, maybe we can challenge that, poke it a little bit, see if it's true. And, if it's true, fine. But if it's not, maybe that means a bigger question. And so, again, we just published this work last fall. And this was work, and of course it's small, 9 quarter sections of canola. And so we're doing it every 3 years, this study. So we're into the next one soon, I hope. We flew drones over top 3 times during the season to match the vegetative growth, the water levels, scan down, see what's going on. And that's not my expertise. So the others did that and did some vegetative models. And then I worked with the producers. Thankfully, these are people I know, trust me. And they said, here's all our farm books. Take a look. Here's our yield, our harvest data, the finances we put into it. Yeah, it's very nice. They're like, well, here's our password to our stuff, so just go in and check it. So, they trust me, and I feel that was and they were okay with us doing this. And what we found, though, is not always actually wasn't as good as they said it was. There was this idea that they're going to be profitable. Well, yeah, some of the time it is, but depending on the conditions. So, there was a lot. Anyway, not to get into all the details, but if you start looking at the greens actually, and there's some weird extremes on that, but some of the greens, that's where actually the wetlands, so these made a bit of money for them. And blues are ones that were intact. But anything of those other colors, from orange to red, is where you're actually losing money, and up to several $100 an acre sometimes. So you put all those input costs into it. How are you going to pay for your phosphorus and nitrogen this year with the prices that are coming up? Are you going to put those and waste it on those acres? Maybe. We might get some return on it, depending on water conditions. But it showed that on average, you look at input costs, field level profit, about $192 an acre on average. If you exclude the wetland basins and just look at the areas that are, upland and arguably better for crops, you had about a $204 an acre profit they made. Within the drain basins was $55. So again, there was profit made a little bit on some of those, but for this producer too, they lost $145 an acre on that. So I know this is a small sample size, it's ongoing, et cetera, there's weaknesses to it, but it's a start, and it was a really, it's the first piece I've seen that's actually addressed that strictly. And also, you can realize, so maybe that narrative that we need to drain it and all that stuff isn't true. So we look at that. So about 60% of the basins that were drained yielded a loss. 70% of them were less than, so there's this rule of thumb that at least I don't know if you operate it with it up here in the Peace Country, but if you make $100 an acre on canola, you're feeling kind of good about that's okay. You feel decent about that. You want to make more. But 70% of the basins didn't reach that benchmark, and 30% had a financial loss. So just those are some of the messages, and I can share that article if you guys want some light nighttime reading before bed. It'll put you to sleep, I promise you that. But what was key and interesting to me, and I'm grabbing my phone so I don't miss the time here, is we're okay? 5 minutes left? Perfect. Is that I took this stuff to these same women and men that I know and work with and have a fairly, they're kind of like, yeah, we're open. They're maybe not quite as environmentally thoughtful as Graham, but they weren't opposed to it. And they're like, yeah, wow, that does make sense. But you know what? I'm still going to do it. I'm still going to go right through them. So I saw them, I'm like, seriously? And good reasons. But I think that's what I was getting at earlier. You can show the financial models, and that's key. It's essential to get in that step. But somehow delving into the people's motivations and why, and maybe thankfully, there are incentives for that. But part of the problem is, too, there's these mixed messages. Drainage is good. All we did was promote drainage from the early part of the century. And suddenly now, 1999, whoop, it's bad. And so, government, right? They keep screwing us. They tell us wrong things. The experts are telling us the wrong things. But it's really true. As times change, as social demands change, you see different messages coming out, and that's frustrating. You're out there just trying to grow a crop or grow some cattle, and suddenly it seems like the sands are shifting beneath your feet, and you don't really quite know what you're supposed to do. So I want to put this out. This is just near our farm. A friend of mine took this picture. What are the opportunities then that exist? So I painted a picture, set you up why wetlands are good, thinking about some of the financial benefits of them. Well, what are the opportunities? Well, there could be payment for these services. Programs like the Alternative Land Use System, ALICE, exists where they actually will pay on a per acre basis for maintaining what exists on the landscape and some restoration. Some people like it, some people hate it. Some governments like it, some people hate it. The problem is, why would you pay someone for what they're doing anyway? Is that a waste of dollars? Maybe it is. But then what if they decide to drain it? So maybe we should pay them for it. From a farmer's perspective, he's like, hey, look at that. I'm providing all this service to society. Screw those urbanites that are getting all this benefit and pay me. Why not? That's something to think about. Income reliability. Ducks Unlimited and others, but have wetland restoration programs in place. And if you compare, what they do is they pay you if you want to restore an area that's actually kind of marginal land, you can sign up for an easement. That's scary. It takes, there's complications on that because it means that it's on your title. But they will pay you the market value of the land and then divide that in half. So say it's $3,000 an acre, they pay you $1,500 an acre on however much is restored, and then every 10 years they'll pay out that next amount. That next amount, that remaining half, corresponds, actually, it beats, under current prices, it beats out feed barley, mixed hay, and CPS wheat, so they used on that. It doesn't beat out canola right now, so let's just be honest, but it does contrast, and it is, it's an option if, and this is just assuming it's really good land. So think about that. Another thing is market access. And I know I'm running out of time here, but there are programs in place. Well, forget about that. If we're really business people as farmers, if we're responding to the consumer's demands, which of course we are, we're small business operators, sometimes bigger business operators. Well, if the consumer is saying they want something different, you should respond to it. Economic theory of supply and demand. And yet we really want to buck that a lot of the time because consumers are starting to say that. They don't. some people, what's grass-fed beef? There's a big round table for sustainable crops that's started out in Canada right now. And you might not like it, but the consumer is saying they're willing to pay premiums at times for this. Cargill, Viterra, Patterson Grain, they all have programs. They're signing up with this group called Sci Global to pay conversion. And so you get a premium for your crops if you haven't converted anything, wetlands, grasslands, trees, in the last 5 years. It's not a big premium yet, but if I could look into the future, which I'm not very good at, but I think it's a trend that's changing. So just want to put that in your ear, because you see that there's no penalization programs in Canada yet for conversion. I saw those same trees being plowed up and burned on the way up here from Grand Prairie this morning. So there's no penalty yet, but there are starting to be incentives. And I think, like I said, the round tables, if you're a beef producer, I think one of the last times I was up here was with the beef producers. We were looking at the environmental farm plan on a couple of your neighbors up here. It was really cool to come up, and I was on their committee. So our Certified Sustainable Beef Framework is the first global standard of this kind, and there's other initiatives that you can look at later. And then there's this idea of just being a good neighbor I want to put out there. It's not a very economic thing to say or financial thing, but there is something. I think there has to be we're social networks. If you're making your neighbor mad, well, maybe you should do something about it. I don't know. That's the way I think many of us are probably raised and pushed. So keep that in mind. The actions you have consequences. And so what I would say is there are immediate actions that can be done. There are supports. There are conservation programs out there. There's wetland policies. There's sort of a rule and regulation side of things. And I think despite opposition a little bit from Saskatchewan canola producers, the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Crops is moving forward because other industry groups are very much supportive of it. So that'll be a journey yet. The beef producers, of course, they don't want to see their grass plowed under. So they all jumped on board on the whole Canadian cattlemen's beef. And it kind of pits the beef guys against the grain guys, which is unfortunate. But I do think it'll be a while, but something's coming with the Roundtable for Crops. And finally, it's a personal choice. You know, you come down to that. This is our home quarter. We just moved back and built a house there last year. And we opted, you know, I guess it's showing my stripes. We restored about 10 acres of wetlands on this quarter. And we got about a $30,000 payment for it, which is quite nice. And we get about $1,000 a year for the next how many years and this was land that we were always getting drowned out. And so we're like, kind of made sense. We're a bit strapped for cash because we were building a house too, so maybe that changes things. Anyway, to conclude, wetlands and water, they're complicated issues and they have many aspects to them. Finances and economics are a very big one, but it's also the social side. I think business case approaches that can bring together a multitude of those perspectives can help. And I think it brings out all of these things. Flood damages to your neighbors. There's power dynamics between rural and urban areas that I think are really built into this. There's a market failure. We have private and public private and public property rights. So those regimes can either help or detract and require different mechanisms of how we deal with conservation, but they're definitely all there. So, there we go. Questions at the panel. Sorry if I went over. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John. I get this feeling you could have talked for a while. Okay, so we're going to spend the next 20 minutes, half hour, with panel discussion. So as long as you got some questions, we're going to continue with that. So if I can have the four speakers come up to the table. And we only have one mic, so if we can't hear you from the floor, I'll run the mic to you. Otherwise, the mic will be at the panel table. So one of the questions on the wall was, is there a provision in the MGA to incentivize through reduced taxes for woodlots or treed areas?
Right now, federal government and Canadian Federation of Woodlot only try to push changing tax breaks. So I think they get that through. And there is also municipal MDF, they provide tax breaks for the woodlot management. Mostly it's dealt with sales of the timber. So lately we have a price of the lumber, of the standing timber, $40, $60 a ton. 200 tons per acre, it's quite a bit of money, and people are selling. And suddenly you get $250,000, $500,000 over the 100 years. And taxmen want to take as much as possible taxes, but if you have a woodlot plan, you will be able to defer those taxes provincially and federally. But other than that, there is no any regulatory laws or policies or anything like that on private forests. You can do whatever you want, pretty much.
So question for Graham. Did you sell land? Were there costs to you? And who paid? Just little questions, Graham.
Did I sell land? No, I didn't sell any land. So there was no cost, I guess, on that. As far as the rest of it, it was all funding, and Adam would know more about it than I. But no, it was completely covered on my part of it.
Yeah, I guess I can speak to that a bit. So when this conversation happened with Graham and Jill about, what can we do here, and then we got involved, we sort of went to Graham and said, what are you willing to do? Like, how much are you willing to change in your operation? And he said, well, I could give you 20 feet back from this ravine that keeps on eroding out anyhow. So we drew up an agreement on that and said, okay, we'll stay within this area. And, we don't sign a very strong document, but it was agreement, and we said, this is what we'll do here, and he said, that's good, and we just had a good relationship, and every time we had an idea or he had an idea, then we just talked with each other, so no payment and no ownership and nothing like that. Oh, funding, yes, the Watershed Resiliency and Restoration Program. So that's a provincial program to prevent flooding and drought. Because we could demonstrate that we were reducing downstream flows, they were willing to fund it. So Graham was called in as a mechanic, as a troubleshooter, as someone to change his operations, and that was his contribution, and we brought the money to get the equipment in there and do the work.
What other jurisdictions have tree inventories besides Thorsby and Grand Cache?
What other project you mean? I can't see it. Okay, hold on.
What other jurisdictions have tree inventories?
Oh, what are you doing? So I started, Thorsby was first one. Sturgeon is ongoing, and the Grand Cache I completed, and now that was last 2 years. I think the Red Deer County might be the next one as well, as people start being more aware of the asset. And inventory, tree inventory, as I said, is not just finding what is your asset, but it's also in many municipalities issue with the potential fire on the acreage owners, potential insects and diseases. Lots of people where they have lots of acres of canola, importance of the trees on the biodiversity on our agriculture crop. And I always give a kudos to Canadian Canola Council. They are still promoting really heavily keeping the trees and wetlands because of the biodiversity in that sense. But more and more counties are coming and asking to do the inventory for the various reasons. Some of them for assets, some of them for the potential risk and liabilities, and that's the major driver.
All right. So didn't have a chance to put any questions up for John or for Adam. So yes.
For John, I was just wondering, what was the program you mentioned about the careful head, about leaving wetlands intact on your land?
Yeah, it's through the Sci Global platform, and so which started in Europe, but now they have a Canadian branch, and so sustainability and so. Pardon me. Yeah, sorry, I know it's the PSI global platform, but it has the Canadian branch. And I believe Cargill and Viterra and Patterson and B Corp, I think they're all sort of engaging with it now. The premiums aren't massive, and I can get you the thing. You can just, they have an application form that you fill out, and you can assert, what you've done. They'll have to get an inspector to come and make sure you're not, lying on your thing, but just to show that you haven't converted anything, and they'll give you a small premium. I think that the hope is this will increase, but like the sustainable beef, it's not a lot yet, and that's kind of why it's but it is something, and it's a signal. So, but I can send actually even the application form if you want. If you get the information, I can send.
John, is that similar to the sustainable acreage programs that a lot of those companies had a few years ago when they were having problems getting into a number of markets? The EU was saying we need to look
Yeah.
at sustainable stuff.
Yeah.
So you needed to sign off. You had to sign off on all your acreage.
Yeah.
And you couldn't have drastically manipulated any
Yeah.
of your acres in any way. So I want to say 1984. I don't know what it's.
What was that? Yeah. There's variations on them, but yeah, for sure.
Go on to anyone in the Cargill or Viterra sites and see.
They'll have a link for it for sustainability stuff. So, yeah.
Anyone else? So there was a comment on the board that foresters suggest decaying forest woody debris is a significant sponge of importance, air conditioning. But it's also a fire hazard. The positive is the decay builds soil.
Well, can I make a comment on that? Again, as we have on more and more now, unfortunately, dead trees because mostly drought related. It takes a long period of time to go wood to decay, depending on the species, depending on the soil, depending on the lots of conditions. People always talk to me about climate change and ask me the questions, what is wood? Wood is just locked carbon, basically. The moment it starts decaying or burning, it goes back to the CO2. And that's where that equal amount of how much it absorbs, how much is released. The danger of that is the amount. How much of the dead wood decay you have, how much dead material you have on the forest floor that will create a potential for the fire. Also impede a regrowth of the new forest as well. And it's also sometimes host for the whole range of the insects and diseases that can really even exaggerate and really kill remaining of the forest. And it was also sometimes home for the huge amount of invasive plants that you can get much easier in the forest because natural regeneration doesn't compete. So it's really fine line how much when I look the amount of dead material in the forest and around in the surrounding area is sometimes that the best thing could happen is the forest fire, and forest fire would wipe this out and new forest is going to come back, and that's. From the forestry point of view, that's the best thing you can happen. If you keep for a long period of time, there is a certain amount that definitely goes to the soil and enrich the soil. But I read the science, it's like a 10-15%. Other 80% basically return back to as a CO2 and contribute to the global warming. People sometimes forget about that. The wood is just a locked carbon. Trees take a CO2 from air, store the carbon in the wood, and a little bit in the soil, and for a long period of time. The moment the wood is dead and it burned, it's just return that amount back to the environment. So be very careful with you guys in municipality, how much is that dead material. Sometimes in the springtime, prairie fire, like burning the ditches, that's what happened in the Sturgeon and other counties. The fire starts in the ditch and spread in the forest, and you say, oh, it's aspen forest, it shouldn't go far away. No, got in the fire and then start spreading. So there is a fine amount of dead material that you can put on the forest floor that is beneficial, but there is also amount that is not beneficial at all.
So today we wanted to start conversations about what is surface water management planning and how do we address surface water. It is a very complex topic, complex issues. But if we don't have the conversations and we don't start talking to our neighbors and our municipalities and having those conversations of the bigger picture, then we can't move forward. We know that piecemeal, I can go out and fix some spots on my land, but that's not going to help anything else that's going on out there. So we need to have the conversations. We need to think of options and solutions that might be helpful for us as we move forward. So today we wanted to bring this subject to light because we've had lots of conversation across the piece of people who are very concerned about it. And we want to know from you if you have other suggestions, other topics that you would like us to prepare and bring some information forward for you. If there's conversations that if you're municipal workers and you want us to come to your council or to your staff and have some conversations with your ASB board or yourselves, then let's start having those conversations and see what we can talk about as far as planning opportunities, because without a plan in place, we can't move forward. We cannot do this piecemeal. We must do this in a larger scope. I'm going to give, if any other questions from the group? Yeah, Bob?
Tozo, the forest industry has in its possession a significant technical tool called LiDAR that they're using now to do the heights of trees as well as understand the basic landscape in the forest. Some municipalities in Alberta use LiDAR on a regular basis. LiDAR will give you a sense of what the watershed is for each particular water crossing in your municipal district, how much water you can expect after how much rain. And that's something that I don't think has been illustrated to municipal planners in Alberta, from my experience. I'm a former member of the Alberta Water Council, and Barry White came on a regular basis to show how LiDAR use has expanded, but I don't think it's reached the municipal planning level yet. And that I see that as a significant way of people understanding the consequences of what they're doing at a particular place on the landscape.
Bob, one of the things I did with Sturgeon County, right away I got a GIS person on the project. I said, I'm not going to go ahead on the project until I get the GIS and planners. And one of the things with the planner, transportation department was, no, we are not interested. When we showed them implication of this, what we are doing, they suddenly, holy macro, we now realized what is the implication to them, to the transportation department. That is absolutely must. What sometimes saddens me between Canada and US, in the US you can go on the federal government website or a state government that you can have access to the all kind of data. Government of Alberta has a blanket by LiDAR all Alberta, 3 times over. The government of Alberta has right now, my friend who works in the forestry and agriculture, we have everything under the LiDAR. And it's owned by the government of Alberta. I know the Grand Prairie municipality, they have an open LiDAR access in their county, and some of the counties are trying to put on the public space. It's absolutely must, and that's one of the things sometimes I said to lots of people who are doing the watershed or environmental issue. Until you get the planning department, engineers and others on the board, and what are you doing and importance to them, you're going to have and especially municipal, you're going to have a huge pushback. Because as you said, engineer, I'm a forest engineer. Straight line is straight line. I don't care if it's a huge wetland below. I'm going to go over the wetland, put a bunch of gravel and soil over it. So it's absolutely must. But information is out there and ready available. I know that Sturgeon County, I think they paid $250,000 to blanket entire Sturgeon County with the LiDAR. And what we did, in some way, I didn't want to show you guys, we literally used what they called cloud points. I can do the inventory from the desktop and point every single tree in any of those areas where the trees are. and we can do much faster. And on top of that, we are thinking now to take even further, lift up the drone, and by the drone now technology, I can scan it and literally find that size of the trees and everything else. So technology is there and moving very rapidly. The access to it and how we interpret that and to whom we get on the board. Like, I look at the crowd here. How many of you guys are planners? None. Or maybe one, or something like that. This crowd should have get the planners. That's why sometimes for you guys, if you're gonna lobby, I remember in some of the projects when I was doing the bioenergy in the municipality, I said, until I got the planner and the chief maintenance guys in this boardroom, and it's a big corporation, I'm not gonna go forward, because those are people who are doing it, and the most implication on them. So, to Mighty Peace Watershed, get the planners, get them on their agenda. Show them what all of us show it today, that they can connect. And I remember, again, in Sturgeon County, they said, why do you need that? We don't want to spend it. When we show, for example, liability, you have some of the trees with the stop signs, and people went through the stop sign because of the tree, couldn't see it, or the stop sign didn't exist. I said, that's a matter of public safety. When I get that's a matter of the forest fire. Are you be accountable for the forest fire in this community that's average house $1.5 million? Oh, no, suddenly they start changing. Trees were planted over the utility lines. I said, hey, you buddy are planning, you have a massive poplar trees over the 4 major utilities for this community, and you're ignoring that? And I said, holy macro. So to get in their language is very important. So the information technology is there, Bob. But again, it has to always call business case and get really people who can make a difference. I said, I respect all of this crowd. I give a kudos to all of you, but they don't have a power. I wish that we have all of the planners in this room. This talk would be entirely different to them. They were going to start understand what is liability. Holy crap. I have to fix that road. Somebody's going to go to the Get My Counsel and say, why the hell are you wasting my money on that? Because you have mismanaged the proper planning. Like a good example, Sexsmith. I just say, who on earth planned that? So the information is there, Bob. So you guys have to push and ask for it.
Okay, any other questions? I'm going to give each of the speakers 30 seconds to give us your final hurrah, the big take-home message from your presentation today.
Okay, I will. I'm going to be quick. Beside this crowd, keep with education. As John and I probably, and all of us mentioned, don't wreck it that is already working. Don't clear the wetlands. Don't clear the trees. And my company says you have to know, make intelligent decisions. You have to have a proper information. And the last and not least, get the right people on the board. I said, due respect to every single of you, but I wish to have all of the planners on these counties in this room as well.
Yeah, I guess I would say we got to take a watershed perspective, so it's got to be broad enough to see how water moves across the landscape. And then I would love to see collaboration between infrastructure people and agriculture producers. Say, here are the options for slowing down water, retaining water to prevent loss of fields, roads, culverts, etc.
Well, I would say don't be scared to reach out to someone who knows more than yourself, because no one knows everything. So there's experts in place. So contact someone other than me.
I don't think that's true. Yeah, just note that there are lots of financial tools out there and economic tools for conservation. So tap into those. And I would say too, I've worked and lived overseas a bit, and in places where there's way more people than here, and where they've really screwed up their environment. And sometimes when you got things good, you don't realize how good it is. You just walk down that road a little way and see in other countries or places that have, and wow, you're not going to get it back. So I would say think about it, use what's available, and man, it's pretty awesome up here, and Alberta's pretty great. So see if we can keep it that way.
All right, so if there's no more questions from anybody, thank you for joining us today. We would like to hear your responses about the information you heard today, or any further suggestions or ideas you have and discussions that we can have. And you can, our cards are on the table, so you can send us the message or give us a phone call. And please drive safe, because weather in Northern Alberta is being finicky today. So have a good day. Thank you.